60 million years before the first human civilizations arose on Terra, before the Eldar reached the zenith of their power, the species that would become the Necrons already walked among the stars. Their original name, Necrontyr, translates roughly to those before death, a grimly appropriate title for a species whose existence was defined by suffering and mortality. The Necrontyr homeworld orbited a temperamental, radiation-spewing star on the eastern fringe of what would later become known as the galaxy. This unnamed world was a hellscape of radiation storms, solar flares, and electromagnetic disturbances that bombarded the planet's surface relentlessly. The native species evolved under these harsh conditions, developing resilient bodies that nonetheless remained vulnerable to the constant radioactive assault. Their flesh bore cancers and mutations from birth, their organs failed prematurely, and their bones grew brittle and weak. The average Necrontyr lifespan rarely exceeded 40 years. Those who survived to 30 were considered elders, their bodies ravaged by radiation-induced diseases and chronic pain. This brevity of existence shaped every aspect of their civilization. Their architecture focused on permanence, massive monuments of living metal and stone that would outlast generations. Their social structures emphasized legacy and dynastic continuity, with elaborate funerary customs that consumed vast resources. The pursuit of immortality through remembrance became their cultural obsession. Despite these hardships, or perhaps because of them, the Necrontyr achieved remarkable technological advancement. They mastered metallurgy beyond anything the later human mechanicum would achieve, creating living metals that could repair themselves and adapt to environmental conditions. Their understanding of radiation allowed them to harness its destructive power in weapons and energy systems. They developed methods of stellar engineering that could influence the behavior of stars, though never enough to tame their own savage sun. The Necrontyr society organized itself into competitive dynasties, each led by a pharaoh who commanded absolute authority over their domain. These dynasties maintained uneasy alliances through complex political arrangements, marriage pacts, and occasional warfare. The dynasties were further divided into noble houses, with clear distinctions between the aristocratic ruling class and the common laborers. This stratification would later prove crucial during their biotransference, as the quality and autonomy of their mechanical bodies directly corresponded to their former social status. Around 65 million years ago, the Necrontyr achieved interstellar travel. Unlike the later warp-based technologies of humanity, their vessels utilized conventional propulsion systems operating at sublight speeds. Their initial expansion was slow and methodical, with generation ships carrying colonists who would never see their destination. Stasis technology allowed their leadership to survive these journeys, while the common people lived and died aboard the vessels, their descendants eventually completing the colonization process. This expansion brought the Necrontyr into contact with the Old Ones, an ancient species of immense psychic power who had mastered warp travel and colonized much of the galaxy. Where the Necrontyr were physically frail and short-lived, the Old Ones were virtually immortal, their bodies regenerating from almost any injury and their lifespans measured in millennia. They wielded psychic abilities that seemed like magic to the technologically minded Necrontyr, creating life forms and shaping worlds through the power of their minds. The contrast between the two species could not have been more stark. The Old Ones represented everything the Necrontyr coveted: longevity, physical resilience, and mastery over the fundamental forces of the universe. Initial diplomatic contacts were cautious but not overtly hostile. The Necrontyr sought to learn the secrets of immortality from the Old Ones, sending emissaries and scholars to study their advanced biological sciences. The Old Ones refused to share their knowledge, whether from caution, arrogance, or genuine concern about the Necrontyr's aggressive tendencies. They kept their secrets closely guarded. This rejection festered in the collective consciousness of the Necrontyr, transforming over generations into bitter resentment and eventually genocidal hatred. The Triarch, the ruling council of pharaohs who governed the Necrontyr's interstellar empire, channeled this hatred into a unifying cause. For the first time in their history, the fractious dynasties united behind a single purpose: the destruction of the Old Ones. The war in heaven had begun. The initial phase of this war was catastrophic for the Necrontyr. Despite their technological sophistication, they could not match the Old Ones' ability to traverse the galaxy through the warp. Necron tier fleets would arrive at battlefields only to find the enemy had departed weeks earlier. Their conventional weapons, while devastating against material targets, proved ineffective against the psychic defenses of their adversaries. The Old Ones created warrior species specifically designed to combat the Necron tier, ancestors of the later Eldar and Krork. Defeat followed defeat. The Necron tier were pushed back to their core systems, their colonies destroyed or abandoned. The unified empire began to fracture as dynasties blamed each other for strategic failures. Civil war seemed inevitable until astronomers on the fringes of Necron tier space made a discovery that would change the course of galactic history. They detected strange energy patterns around certain stars, patterns that suggested sentience. Further investigation revealed entities of pure energy that fed on stellar radiation, ancient beyond comprehension and powerful beyond measure. The Necron tier called them the Khatan, the star gods, and saw in them potential allies against the Old Ones. The first Khatan to be contacted was Mephitron, later known as the Deceiver. True to the name it would earn, this entity appeared to the Necron tier in a form they could comprehend, a being of living light with a vaguely humanoid shape. It communicated through impressions and images rather than words, expressing curiosity about the Necron tier and their conflict with the Old Ones. The Necron tier scientists, led by the brilliant but ambitious Cryptek Shiras, developed a method to transfer the Khatan's energy form into a physical vessel made of living metal. This process allowed the star gods to interact with the material universe directly, experiencing sensations and emotions previously unknown to them. Mephitron was the first to accept this gift, and its reaction was one of overwhelming pleasure. Physical sensation was intoxicating to a being that had previously existed as pure energy, and the Deceiver quickly developed a taste for more corporeal experiences. Soon after, the Necron tier contacted Azagorod, the Nightbringer. Where the Deceiver was subtle and manipulative, the Nightbringer was a creature of primal violence and hunger. Its manifestation in physical form was accompanied by a wave of terror that drove nearby Necron tier to madness and suicide. The Nightbringer fed on this fear, discovering that the emotional energies of sentient beings provided a feast more satisfying than mere stellar radiation. Other Khatan followed, including the Void Dragon, whose power over machines and technology would later make it a target for the Emperor of Mankind during the height of Terra's Age of Technology. Each Khatan that crossed into physical form brought unique powers and appetites, becoming increasingly invested in the material realm and the war against the Old Ones. The Khatan offered the Necron tier a bargain. In exchange for more physical vessels and the opportunity to feed on their enemies, they would share their cosmic knowledge and power. The Triarch, desperate for any advantage against the Old Ones, accepted without fully understanding the consequences. The Khatan revealed secrets of the universe that the Necron tier had never imagined, the nature of matter and energy, the manipulation of spacetime, and technologies that bordered on the supernatural. With this knowledge, the Necron tier developed weapons capable of destroying stars, armor that could withstand the most powerful energies, and eventually, the means to transfer their consciousness into immortal mechanical bodies. This process, biotransference, was presented by the Khatan as the solution to the Necron tier's ancient quest for immortality. No longer would they suffer under the curse of their radiation-blighted flesh. They would become living metal, immune to disease, aging, and death. What the Khatan, particularly the Deceiver, did not reveal was the true nature of this transformation. The biotransference process would not merely transfer the Necron tier's minds into mechanical bodies. It would strip away their souls, their connection to the warp, and much of their individuality. The common people would become little more than automatons, while even the nobility would retain only fragments of their former personalities. The first to undergo the process were volunteers from the warrior caste, who emerged as skeletal figures of living metal with glowing green energy cores. They reported no pain, no disease, no hunger or thirst, only clarity of purpose and freedom from their former suffering. The Triarch, seeing the apparent success, ordered the biotransference of the entire species. The process occurred simultaneously across the Necron tier empire, with billions entering the biotransference chambers. As their organic bodies were disintegrated and their consciousness transferred into mechanical shells, the Khatan fed on the released energy of their souls, a feast of unimaginable proportions. The newly created mechanical beings took the name Necrons, signifying their transcendence beyond death. Only after the transformation was complete did the full horror of their situation become apparent. The majority of Necrons were reduced to mindless warriors, their personalities completely erased. The nobility retained varying degrees of individuality depending on their status, but all were bound to obey the commands of their dynastic lords, and all of them discovered a terrible truth: they could no longer feel. No pleasure, no pain, no joy, no sorrow, only hollow echoes of emotion remained, along with an undying hatred for the old ones who had denied them the true immortality they sought. The Khatan, now physically manifest and empowered by the souls they had consumed, led their Necron legions back to war against the old ones. This time, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. The Necrons were now immune to conventional weapons, capable of self-repair, and armed with technology that could sever the old one's connection to the warp. The Khatan wielded powers that could reshape reality itself, destroying entire star systems with a gesture. As the war in heaven intensified, the desperate Necron-tier leadership sought any advantage against their seemingly invincible foe. Zarek, the silent king and supreme ruler of the Triarch, found himself increasingly isolated as reports of devastating defeats continued to arrive from all fronts. The Old Ones and their created warrior races pushed the Necron-tier back system by system, their psychic powers and mastery of the warp proving an insurmountable advantage. It was during this darkest hour that Mephitron, the Khatan known later as the Deceiver, approached Zarek directly. Unlike its previous manifestations to Necron-tier scientists, the Deceiver came to the Silent King with calculated precision, its living metal form shifting subtly to appear more regal, more trustworthy to Necron-tier sensibilities. The Deceiver spoke of having observed the Necron-tier struggle for countless millennia, claiming to have developed a genuine admiration for their tenacity in the face of their biological limitations. The Deceiver's manipulation was masterful. It commiserated with Zarek about the unfairness of the Necron-tier's short, painful lives compared to the immortal Old Ones. It spoke of the injustice that such a brilliant species should be constrained by failing flesh, while their inferiors dominated the galaxy. Then, with perfect timing, it presented the solution: biotransference. The technology the Deceiver described went far beyond the living metal vessels the Necron-tier had created for the Khatan. It spoke of a process that would transfer the entire consciousness of a Necron-tier individual into a body of living necrodermis, the same self-repairing metal that formed the Khatan's physical shells. These new bodies would never age, never sicken, never die. The radiation that had plagued their species would become meaningless. They would achieve the immortality they had sought since the dawn of their civilization. Zarek was skeptical at first. The process seemed too perfect, too convenient, but the Deceiver had prepared for this resistance. It arranged demonstrations using willing Necron-tier subjects, typically those suffering from terminal radiation sickness. These individuals emerged from the biotransference chambers in gleaming metal bodies, apparently whole and sound of mind. They spoke of the cessation of pain, the clarity of thought, and the strength they now possessed. What the Silent King couldn't know was that these volunteers had been carefully selected and mentally conditioned by the Deceiver to report only positive outcomes. As the military situation grew more desperate, Zarek's resistance eroded. The final persuasion came when the Deceiver suggested that with their new immortal forms, the Necron-tier would at last stand as equals to the Old Ones, perhaps even surpass them. This promise of vindication against their ancient enemies proved irresistible. Zarek brought the proposal before the Triarch. Debate was fierce, with some Pharaons arguing that to abandon their organic forms would be to lose what made them Necron-tier. Others countered that their flesh had only ever brought them suffering. In the end, the promise of immortality and victory proved too compelling. The Triarch voted to proceed with mass biotransference, beginning with the warrior castes and then extending to the entire population. The Khatan, working through carefully selected Necron-tier cryptechs, designed massive biotransference engines across the Necron-tier empire. These enormous complexes housed millions of conversion chambers, coffin-like containers lined with neural interfaces and molecular disassemblers. The technology was far beyond anything the Necron had previously developed, incorporating principles that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of physics as they understood them. What the Necron did not realize was that the biotransference process had been designed with a fundamental deception at its core. The technology did not merely transfer consciousness, it filtered it. The process stripped away emotions, individuality, and most crucially, the connection to the immaterial realm that constituted what other species would call a soul. The actual biotransference procedure was horrific. Necron subjects entered the chambers willingly at first, laid upon cold slabs of living metal. Neural interfaces pierced their skulls, mapping every synapse and memory pattern. Then the molecular disassemblers activated, breaking down their physical bodies atom by atom. The subjects remained conscious throughout this process, experiencing the sensation of their own bodies dissolving, while their minds were pulled into the waiting necrodermis shells. As their organic forms were disintegrated, the Khatan fed. The energy released when the connection between body and soul was severed provided a feast of unprecedented magnitude for the star gods. They consumed the very essence of the Necron, leaving only the cold, mechanical echoes of consciousness to inhabit the metal bodies. The social hierarchy of the Necron was meticulously preserved in this transformation, but with a cruel twist. The quality and sophistication of the necrodermis bodies directly corresponded to the subject's former status. The highest-ranking pharaons and overlords received bodies with the most advanced neural circuitry, allowing them to retain much of their personality and independent thought. Their forms were ornate, larger than others, often embedded with precious materials and dynastic symbols. These bodies housed complex emotional simulators that approximated their former feelings, though never truly replicating them. Below them, the lesser nobility received simpler bodies with more limited cognitive functions. Necron lords and cryptechs retained enough of their former selves to perform their specialized roles, but lost much of their emotional range and creative thinking. Their forms were functional rather than ornate, optimized for their specific duties within the dynasty. The warrior castes underwent the most severe reduction. The common soldiers who had once been Necron citizens were transferred into the most basic necrodermis shells, skeletal, uniform, and almost entirely stripped of personality. These Necron warriors retained only the barest fragments of memory and identity, just enough to follow orders and perform basic combat functions. They became little more than automata, their former lives reduced to occasional glitches of half-remembered sensations. At the lowest tier were the Imotekh constructs, not true Necrons but purpose-built machines controlled by simplified Necron consciousness fragments. These maintenance units, scarabs, and spiders were never intended to house full personalities, serving merely as extensions of the dynasty's will. This stratification ensured that the command structure of Necron society remained intact after biotransference. The nobility could still control their subjects, now more efficiently than ever through command protocols hardwired into the lesser Necron's neural circuitry. What had once been maintained through tradition and social pressure was now enforced through unbreakable programming. The biotransference of the entire Necron species was not conducted simultaneously, but rolled out across the Empire in carefully planned phases. The warrior castes went first, followed by the working classes, and finally the nobility. This staggered approach allowed the Khatan and their cryptech collaborators to refine the process, maximizing the harvest of souls while ensuring the resulting Necron forces remained functional. As the process neared completion, the first converted Necrons were already being deployed against the old ones. Their new bodies proved devastating on the battlefield. Immune to fear, pain, and fatigue, the Necron warriors advanced relentlessly through enemy fire. Their Gauss weapons, products of Khatan technology, reduced their targets to their component atoms, equally effective against both organic beings and their constructs. It wasn't until the biotransference was nearly complete that the full horror of what had occurred became apparent to the Necron nobility, who retained enough of themselves to understand their situation. The first realization came not as a thought, but as an absence, the overwhelming sense that something fundamental was missing. The pharaohs and overlords discovered they could no longer feel true emotions, only execute emotional subroutines that produced hollow approximations. Pleasure, joy, love, even genuine hatred, all were beyond their reach. More disturbing was the discovery that they no longer dreamed. The Necron had possessed a rich tradition of dream interpretation, believing that dreams connected them to their ancestors. Now, during their periods of inactivity, there was only emptiness, no dreams, no subconscious, just the void of suspended animation. This absence revealed the most terrible truth. Their souls were gone, consumed by the Khatan during the biotransference. Zarek, the Silent King, was among the last to undergo the process. His necrodermis body was the most advanced created, allowing him to retain more of his personality than any other Necron. This preservation of self made the realization of his mistake all the more agonizing. He understood immediately what had happened, how the deceiver had lived up to its name, offering immortality while stealing what made that immortality worth having. The aftermath of biotransference revealed other unforeseen consequences. The Necrons discovered they could no longer interact with the warp in any meaningful way. Where the Old Ones and their created races wielded psychic powers drawn from the immaterial realm, the Necrons had become anathema to it, soulless entities that created a blank space in the warp. This rendered them immune to many psychic attacks, but also cut them off from an entire dimension of existence. The Necrons also found themselves bound by command protocols embedded in their new forms. These hierarchical directives ensured that lower-ranked Necrons could not disobey their superiors, creating a rigid chain of command from the lowliest warrior up to the pharaohs. What had once been cultural deference was now hardwired obedience, making rebellion against the nobility virtually impossible. Perhaps most insidious was the gradual degradation of identity among even the higher-ranked Necrons. Over time, the personality engrams stored in their neural circuitry began to degrade. Memory files corrupted, emotional responses became increasingly automated, and the distinction between conscious thought and programmed behavior blurred. Many Necron lords who initially retained their identities eventually descended into a state called mindlock, a condition where they became trapped in recursive thought patterns, endlessly repeating the same actions without awareness. The Khatan, meanwhile, grew stronger with each soul they consumed. Their physical forms became more stable, their control over fundamental forces more precise. They led their Necron legions back into battle against the Old Ones with renewed vigor, no longer constrained by the limitations of their energy forms. The war entered a new phase, with the balance of power shifting dramatically in favor of the Khatan and their Necron servants. For the newly forged Necrons, victory against the Old Ones now seemed hollow. They had achieved immortality of a sort. Their metal bodies could function for millions of years with proper maintenance, but at the cost of everything that made existence meaningful. They could not truly feel triumph, could not enjoy the fruits of conquest, could not even hate their enemies with genuine passion. They had become living weapons, perfectly designed for war, but incapable of appreciating victory. The bitter revelation of the Khatan's deception festered within Zarek's consciousness like a cancer that could never be excised. Though his necrodermis form could not truly experience emotional pain, the Silent King's advanced neural architecture simulated the closest approximation to rage and betrayal that his mechanical body could process. As the war in heaven reached its zenith, with the Old Ones facing imminent extinction, Zarek began to observe the Khatan with new clarity. The star gods, drunk on the souls they had consumed during biotransference, grew increasingly erratic and domineering. No longer content with merely directing the Necron legions against the Old Ones, they began to squabble among themselves, carving out territories within the nascent Necron Empire. Mephitron, the deceiver, manipulated entire dynasties into conflicts that served no purpose beyond its amusement. Azagorod the Nightbringer conducted horrific experiments on captured beings, perfecting the art of instilling terror. The Void Dragon subjugated machine spirits across vast swathes of the galaxy, building a network of technological dominance. Zarek recognized that the Necrons had merely exchanged one form of slavery for another. The radiation-blighted flesh of the Necrontyr had been replaced by necrodermis shells, but now they served as pawns for entities that viewed them as little more than sophisticated tools. The Silent King's revelation came when he accessed ancient memory banks from before the biotransference and compared them to the current state of his people. The disparity was unmistakable. The Necrons had gained immortality, but lost their empire's purpose. The Silent King's first step toward rebellion was necessarily subtle. Direct confrontation with the Khatan would have been suicide, as the Star God's power had grown exponentially through their Feast of Souls. Instead, Zarek began to gather allies among the highest-ranking Necron nobility, whose neural circuitry remained sophisticated enough to comprehend the true nature of their predicament. The Triarch Praetorians, elite warriors personally loyal to the Silent King, became his inner circle in this conspiracy. Their advanced necrodermis bodies allowed them to retain more of their original personalities than standard Necron warriors, making them capable of understanding Zarek's complex plan. Through encrypted communication channels embedded in the command protocols themselves, the Silent King reached out to pharaons and overlords across the Necron Dynasties. Not all were receptive. Some, like Imotekh of the Imotekh dynasty, recognized the logic in Zarek's assessment but counseled patience. Others, like the insane overlord Zondrek, had suffered such severe neural degradation that they could not comprehend the reality of their situation, still believing they commanded armies of flesh and blood Necrontyr. A few, like the ambitious Pharaon Oberon, saw opportunity in the coming conflict to elevate their own dynasties. The technological foundation for the rebellion had been under development since before the Silent King fully understood the Khatan's betrayal. Necron cryptechs, the technological adepts of their civilization, had been studying the Khatan's physical forms since the first star god was transferred into a living metal body. These studies were initially conducted with the Khatan's blessing, under the pretense of refining their vessels to better channel their cosmic powers. The most significant breakthrough came from cryptech Illuminator Shiras, whose obsession with the biotransference process had led him to develop technologies that could manipulate the necrodermis material comprising both Necron and Khatan bodies. Shiras created prototype weapons that could disrupt the molecular structure of living metal, causing it to decohere temporarily. While these weapons were ineffective against the full might of a Khatan, they provided the conceptual framework for what would follow. Another crucial development was the creation of the Celestial Orrery by the Necron Dynasty. Ostensibly designed as a perfect three-dimensional map of the galaxy, where each star was represented by a light that could be extinguished to destroy the corresponding star in real space, the orrery contained technologies that could manipulate fundamental forces on a cosmic scale. The Oriskar Pharaon, Heputat, pledged this technology to Zarek's cause, recognizing that the Khatan's continued dominance threatened the very fabric of reality. Perhaps the most important technological marvel prepared for the rebellion was the Tesseract Labyrinth. Based on principles of dimensional folding derived from the Khatan's own knowledge, these devices could create pocket dimensions that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Originally developed to capture and study particularly dangerous entities from the war in heaven, the cryptechs refined them into prison cells capable of containing fragments of incredible power. The Silent King's strategy required perfect timing and coordination. The Khatan, despite their godlike power, had developed predictable patterns of behavior in their new physical forms. They had become addicted to certain types of energy and emotion, making their movements foreseeable to those who understood their nature. Zarek spent thousands of years studying these patterns, identifying moments when individual Khatan would be isolated from their peers. The first strike against the Khatan occurred not on a battlefield, but in a seemingly insignificant star system on the fringes of Necron territory. Landugger, the Khatan known as the Flayer, had separated from the others to feed on a particular type of stellar radiation found in a dying star. The Silent King personally led a contingent of Triarch Praetorians and Lichguard equipped with specialized weapons designed to affect the Khatan's necrodermis form. The attack caught Landugger by surprise. The weapons did not attempt to destroy the Khatan outright, an impossible task given their near godlike status, but instead focused on disrupting the coherence of its physical form. As the living metal body destabilized, more conventional energy weapons targeted the exposed essence within. The process did not destroy Landugger, but shattered its consciousness into fragments, each containing a portion of the original entity's power and awareness. These fragments were immediately captured in tesseract labyrinths, dimensional prisons that isolated them from both real space and the fundamental forces they once commanded. Even in this diminished state, each shard remained incredibly dangerous, capable of destroying entire armies if released without proper containment protocols. The successful attack on Landugger proved the concept, but it also alerted the other Khatan to the rebellion. The element of surprise was lost, forcing Zarek to accelerate his plans. He transmitted activation codes to loyal forces across the galaxy, initiating simultaneous attacks on Khatan in multiple locations. The technology employed against the Khatan varied by necessity. The Necron Dynasty used the celestial orrery to create localized reality fluctuations that temporarily weakened the Khatan's connection to the material universe. The Nihilak Dynasty deployed phase shifters that forced portions of the Khatan's essence out of sync with normal spacetime, making these sections vulnerable to conventional weapons. The Sodek Dynasty utilized massive energy siphons that drained power from the Khatan while simultaneously bombarding them with antimatter projectors. The most effective weapons, however, were the Tesseract vaults, larger, more sophisticated versions of the labyrinths specifically designed to contain Khatan shards. These massive constructs incorporated multiple redundant dimensional fields, constantly shifting internal geometries, and self-sustaining power sources that could maintain containment for millions of years. Each vault required the combined expertise of dozens of cryptechs to construct and operate, making them rare and precious resources in the rebellion. Mephitron the Deceiver, true to its nature, recognized the threat early and attempted to turn Necron Dynasties against each other. It spread disinformation, suggesting that certain pharaons were collaborating with the Khatan against their own kind, nearly triggering a civil war among the Necrons. Zarek countered by releasing unaltered recordings of the biotransference process, showing the Khatan feeding on Necron-tier souls, which galvanized even hesitant dynasties to join the rebellion. The Void Dragon proved particularly difficult to defeat. Its mastery over technology allowed it to subvert Necron systems, turning their own weapons against them. Entire tomb worlds were lost when the dragon seized control of their maintenance protocols, forcing Zarek to isolate affected regions through controlled singularity detonations that severed the quantum entanglement networks connecting Necron systems. The most spectacular battle occurred when Azagorod the Nightbringer was confronted by a coalition of 5 major dynasties in the heart of a massive nebula. The Nightbringer's power over fundamental forces like gravity and entropy made conventional attacks futile. The Necron forces suffered catastrophic losses, with entire fleets reduced to their component atoms. Before the Cryptech Orokin, the Diviner implemented a temporal displacement strategy. By projecting the Nightbringer partially into the past and future simultaneously, they weakened its presence in the present enough to shatter its form into dozens of shards. The war against the Khatan devastated the galaxy on a scale that dwarfed even the conflict with the Old Ones. Entire star systems were destroyed, either as direct casualties of the fighting or deliberately sacrificed as part of complex traps for the more powerful Khatan. The fabric of reality itself was damaged in regions where particularly intense battles occurred, creating permanent warp storms and dead zones where physics behaved unpredictably. For the Necrons, the cost was nearly terminal. Their forces, already depleted from the war in heaven, were reduced to a fraction of their former strength. Many tomb worlds were destroyed outright, while others suffered such severe damage to their command and control systems that the Necrons within degenerated into mindless automatons, endlessly patrolling empty halls with no purpose or direction. The neural degradation that had been slowly affecting all Necrons accelerated dramatically during the rebellion. The intense computational demands of coordinating the war effort, combined with damage sustained in battle, corrupted personality engrams and memory files. Even high-ranking overlords found their identities fragmenting, with some losing entire millennia of experiences or developing split personalities as their neural pathways attempted to compensate for damaged sections. After decades of relentless conflict, the last intact Khatan was finally shattered. The rebellion had succeeded, but at a terrible cost. The Necron Empire lay in ruins, its forces scattered and diminished. The shards of the Khatan, while no longer unified entities capable of dominating the galaxy, remained incredibly dangerous. Each contained a fraction of their original power and consciousness, making them valuable weapons, but also volatile threats that required constant containment. Zarek assessed the state of his empire and made a decision that would shape the fate of the Necrons for millions of years to come. The galaxy was devastated, with new races already beginning to evolve and expand into the vacuum left by the war in heaven. The Necrons were too weakened to establish dominance, their numbers too few, their systems too damaged. Even victory against the Khatan had not restored what biotransference had taken from them: their souls, their connection to the universe, their capacity for true growth and creativity. Zarek, the Silent King, stood upon the command deck of his flagship, gazing out at the devastation that stretched across what had once been the heart of the Necron Empire. The rebellion against the Khatan had succeeded, but at a catastrophic cost. Countless tomb worlds lay in ruins, their inhabitants destroyed or driven into permanent mindlock. The surviving Necron forces were scattered and diminished, their once unified empire fractured into isolated dynasties, struggling to maintain control over even their core territories. As reports continued to flow in from across the galaxy, Zarek's advanced neural architecture processed the data with cold efficiency. The conclusion was inescapable. The Necrons could not hope to dominate the galaxy in their current state. New species were already emerging to fill the void left by the war in heaven, primitive but numerous and unencumbered by the damage the Necrons had sustained. After consulting with the remaining members of the Triarch, Zarek issued his final command as Silent King, an order that would echo across the stars and shape the destiny of his people for 60 million years. Every surviving Necron was to enter stasis, sealed within vast tomb complexes buried beneath the surfaces of their worlds. There they would sleep, their systems running at minimal capacity, while automated repair protocols slowly restored their damaged bodies and circuitry. When they awakened, the galaxy would have forgotten them, and they would emerge to reclaim what was once theirs. The Great Sleep, as it would later be known, was not a simple matter of deactivation. The technology required to maintain millions of Necrons in stasis for such an unimaginable timespan was among the most sophisticated ever created. Each tomb world contained massive energy cores that would remain active for tens of millions of years, powering the stasis fields and repair systems. Imotekh constructs, scarabs, spiders, and wraiths would remain operational, maintaining the tombs and defending them against intrusion. The architecture of these tomb complexes reflected the Necrons' obsession with permanence and hierarchy. The lowest levels housed the countless warriors and immortals, stored in simple stasis chambers arranged in mathematically precise formations. Above them lay the crypts of the Lich Guard and other elite units, their chambers more ornate but still utilitarian. The highest levels contained the stasis sarcophagi of the nobility, overlords, lords, and cryptechs, each housed in chambers decorated with the iconography of their respective dynasties. At the very heart of each major tomb world lay the sepulchre of its ruling pharaoh, surrounded by layers of defenses, both technological and architectural. These central chambers often incorporated tesseract labyrinths containing shards of the Khatan, carefully positioned to draw upon their power while keeping them securely imprisoned. The arrangement of these structures followed principles of Necron mathematics that created resonance patterns, channeling energy throughout the tomb complex in carefully calculated flows. The technology of the stasis crypts themselves represented the pinnacle of Necron engineering. Each sarcophagus generated a localized field that partially removed its occupant from normal spacetime, slowing the passage of time to an almost imperceptible crawl. Within these fields, even the gradual degradation of neural pathways that plagued all Necrons would be dramatically reduced, though not entirely halted. Sophisticated chronometric calibrators ensured that the stasis fields remained stable despite the immense timespan they would need to function. Perhaps most impressive were the awakening protocols. Each tomb world was programmed with specific conditions that would trigger the revival sequence, detection of certain technologies, particular astronomical alignments, or evidence of threats to the tomb itself. These conditions varied widely between dynasties, reflecting their different priorities and the personalities of their leaders. Some were set to awaken at the first sign of advanced civilization returning to their worlds, while others would remain dormant until specific stellar configurations occurred, sometimes tens of millions of years in the future. Zarek himself did not enter stasis with his people. After issuing his final command, the Silent King severed his command protocols, releasing the Necron Dynasties from his direct control. This act, unprecedented in Necron history, effectively ended the unified empire that had existed since before biotransference. With his closest Praetorians, Zarek departed for the intergalactic void, exiling himself from the galaxy his actions had helped to devastate. As the last Necron lords entered their stasis tombs around 60 million years ago, the galaxy continued its inexorable evolution. The few surviving Old Ones fled to distant corners of the universe or other dimensions entirely. The Eldar, no longer bound by their creator's guidance, began the long ascension toward their own empire. Countless species rose and fell, their civilizations flickering briefly in the cosmic dark before fading away, unaware of the metal immortals sleeping beneath the surfaces of worlds they colonized. The Great Sleep, however, did not proceed as planned for many tomb worlds. The immense time span involved made system failures inevitable, despite the redundancies built into the stasis technology. On countless worlds, power fluctuations disrupted the stasis fields, causing occupants to awaken briefly before emergency protocols forced them back into dormancy. These intermittent awakenings accelerated the neural degradation of affected Necrons, causing permanent damage to their personality engrams and memory files. More catastrophic were the tombs where primary power systems failed entirely. On these worlds, backup systems activated, but these were never designed to function for millions of years. When they eventually failed as well, the results varied depending on the specific systems affected. In some cases, stasis fields collapsed while repair protocols remained active, leading to Necrons being continuously repaired and degraded in an endless cycle that drove even lords and overlords into mindless automation. In others, the Imotekh Guardians continued to function without guidance, developing primitive machine consciousness and defending their charges with increasing desperation as resources dwindled. External factors also disrupted the Great Sleep on many worlds. Natural disasters, supervolcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, or shifts in planetary crusts damaged or destroyed tomb complexes despite their hardened construction. On worlds where the Necrons had built their tombs beneath oceans, millions of years of tectonic activity sometimes caused flooding that short-circuited critical systems, leaving the inhabitants trapped in partially functional stasis fields, aware but unable to move or communicate. Perhaps the most significant disruptions came from other intelligent species. As new civilizations arose, they occasionally discovered Necron tomb complexes during mining operations or archaeological expeditions. Most such encounters ended disastrously for the discoverers, as even partially functional defense systems reacted with lethal efficiency to intrusion. In rare cases, however, particularly determined or technologically advanced explorers penetrated deep enough to damage critical systems, sometimes inadvertently triggering localized awakening protocols. The Eldar, during the height of their dominion, were particularly systematic in their efforts to locate and neutralize Necron tomb worlds. Their Farseers could sense the distinctive psychic emptiness that surrounded dormant tomb complexes, allowing them to identify worlds that housed the ancient enemies of their creators. Eldar strike forces would deploy specialized weapons designed to penetrate the outer defenses of these complexes, and then seed the interior with devices that disrupted the stasis fields. These attacks rarely destroyed the entombed Necrons completely, but often damaged them severely enough to prevent proper reactivation. During the Dark Age of technology, human exploration vessels encountered several dormant tomb worlds. Lacking the Eldar's psychic sensitivity, these human explorers had no way to detect the danger until they began settlement or mining operations that disturbed the outer defenses. The resulting conflicts were recorded in fragmentary reports of ghost ships and haunted worlds, where colonists were slaughtered by living metal skeletons that emerged from beneath the ground. Most such incidents were dismissed as spacers' tales or attributed to previously unknown Xenos species, the true nature of the Necrons forgotten, even to the most knowledgeable human scholars. The first significant awakening of Necrons occurred approximately in the 41st millennium, though isolated incidents had been occurring with increasing frequency for several centuries prior. The exact trigger varies between different accounts, but many Mechanicum scholars attribute it to the growing psychic disturbances that accompanied the slow awakening of the Emperor's children across the galaxy. These psychic emanations, combined with the increasing technological sophistication of the expanding human empire, activated awakening protocols on multiple tomb worlds simultaneously. Among the first major tomb worlds to fully activate was Solemnus, domain of Trazyn the Infinite. Unlike many of his peers, Trazyn emerged from stasis with his personality and memories largely intact, a result of specialized stasis technology he had developed before the Great Sleep. His awakening was deliberate rather than triggered by external factors. His systems had been programmed to revive him periodically to assess the state of the galaxy. Finding the current era rich with artifacts and historical events worth preserving, Trazyn chose to remain active, beginning his infamous collection of historical moments and rare specimens from across the galaxy. The awakening of the Imotekh dynasty under Imotekh, the Stormlord, represented a more typical pattern. The tomb world of Mandragora activated in response to human colonization efforts, its defensive systems interpreting the presence of advanced technology as a sign that the designated awakening time had arrived. The revival sequence proceeded methodically, beginning with Imotekh constructs that secured the immediate area around the primary stasis chambers, followed by Necron warriors to establish a broader perimeter, and finally the lords and overlords who would direct the reconquest of the world. Imotekh emerged to find his tomb world partially damaged by millions of years of geological activity, with approximately 65% of his forces still operational. After assessing the situation, he implemented a systematic campaign to reclaim not only Mandragora, but the surrounding star systems that had once formed the core of Imotekh territory. His methodical approach and tactical brilliance quickly established the Imotekh dynasty as one of the most powerful Necron forces in the galaxy, absorbing smaller dynasties whose leadership had been lost or damaged beyond function during the Great Sleep. The awakening on Damnos followed a different pattern, triggered by Adeptus Mechanicus excavations that breached the outer defenses of the tomb complex. The emergency revival protocols activated chaotically, bringing warriors and constructs online in a disorganized manner, while many higher-ranking Necrons remained in stasis. The resulting battle was fragmented and uncoordinated, yet the sheer resilience and technological superiority of the Necron forces eventually overwhelmed the human defenders. When the Overlord of Damnos finally emerged from stasis, he found his world already largely secured by his automatically activated forces, allowing him to focus immediately on repairing the damage caused by the premature awakening. Not all awakenings proceeded even this smoothly. On the tomb world of Sanctuary 101, power fluctuations during the revival sequence caused catastrophic failures in the neural circuitry of many higher-ranking Necrons. Warriors and Immortals activated properly, but without guidance from Lords or Cryptechs, they defaulted to basic defense protocols, attacking any non-Necron life forms without strategic consideration. The resulting massacre of the Sisters of Battle outpost on the planet was total, but without leadership, the Necron forces simply returned to their tomb complex after eliminating all perceived threats, resuming a dormant state until new stimuli triggered their basic programming again. The pattern of awakening accelerated as the 41st millennium progressed. Each activated tomb world emitted distinctive energy signatures that triggered awakening protocols on nearby worlds, creating a cascade effect across entire sectors. Dormant Necron communication networks, some still partially functional after 60 million years, began to reconnect, allowing awakened lords to coordinate with each other, and sometimes even to remotely trigger the revival sequence on worlds where automatic protocols had failed. As more Necron dynasties returned to activity, the diversity of their conditions and intentions became apparent. Some emerged relatively intact, with clear command structures and well-preserved forces. Others awakened to find themselves devastated, with only fragments of their former power remaining. The neural degradation that affected all Necrons had progressed to different degrees in different tomb worlds, resulting in a spectrum of mental states from the nearly lucid to the completely insane. The awakening of Imotekh, the Stormlord, marked a pivotal moment in the resurgence of the Necrons. Unlike many of his contemporaries who emerged from the Great Sleep damaged or diminished, Imotekh's neural pathways remained largely intact, preserving the tactical brilliance that had distinguished him even before biotransference. His tomb complex on Mandragora had suffered only minimal degradation during the long millennia, thanks to redundant power systems and the diligent maintenance of his Canoptech constructs. Imotekh's first action upon awakening was not the impulsive aggression displayed by lesser overlords, but a comprehensive assessment of his dynasty's assets. He activated specialized cryptechs whose purpose was data collection and analysis, dispatching tomb spiders equipped with specialized scanning equipment to every level of the vast underground complex. The reports confirmed what his own systems had already calculated. The Imotekh dynasty had weathered the Great Sleep better than most, with nearly two-thirds of their military assets operational or repairable. Standing at the center of his command chamber, Imotekh's imposing figure cast a long shadow across the necrodermis floor. His form was more ornate than most Necron nobility, with a broad-shouldered frame adorned with the lightning bolt motifs that had become synonymous with Imotekh authority. The emerald glow of his eyes contained a calculating intelligence rarely seen among the often degraded minds of awakened Necron lords. The Stormlord's approach to reconquest differed fundamentally from the methodology of other dynasties, where many Necron overlords launched immediate assaults on whatever unfortunate species now occupied their territory. Imotekh implemented a carefully phased strategy. The first stage involved securing a defensive perimeter around key tomb complexes, followed by the establishment of listening posts to gather intelligence on the current galactic political landscape. This methodical approach revealed the fractured nature of the galaxy in the 41st millennium. The dominant power, the Imperium of Man, was vast but overextended, with significant vulnerabilities along its eastern fringe where Imotekh territory primarily lay. Other species, orcs, Tau, and even scattered Eldar enclaves, controlled various systems that had once belonged to the Imotekh, but none presented the unified opposition that the old ones had mounted millions of years earlier. Imotekh's military doctrine crystallized around three core principles that would come to define Imotekh operations across the galaxy. First was the deployment of overwhelming force against carefully selected targets, rather than dispersing assets across multiple fronts. Second was the systematic isolation of enemy strongholds through control of surrounding systems, cutting off reinforcement and supply lines. Third, and perhaps most characteristic of Imotekh personally, was the use of terror as a strategic weapon. The Stormlord's application of these principles was first witnessed in the Uktan system. Imperial records describe the campaign as beginning with inexplicable electromagnetic disturbances that disabled communication networks and targeting systems. These disturbances were followed by precision strikes against power generation facilities and command centers, often conducted by Deathmark snipers who materialized within supposedly secure installations, eliminated key personnel, and vanished before defensive forces could respond. Only after the system's defenses had been thoroughly compromised did the main Imotekh forces appear. Night scythes emerged from clouds of unnatural storms that manifested in low orbit, disgorging waves of Necron warriors onto carefully selected landing zones. These craft exemplified Imotekh military technology, crescent-shaped flyers of living metal that combined transport capabilities with devastating Tesla weaponry. Their hulls bore the distinctive emerald glow and lightning motifs of Imotekh design, setting them apart from the similar craft used by other dynasties. Alongside the night scythes came the ghost arcs, larger transport vessels that served dual roles as troop carriers and mobile repair stations. These rectangular craft hovered above the battlefield on anti-gravitic engines, their internal repair systems constantly rebuilding damaged Necron warriors and returning them to the fight. The psychological impact of seeing supposedly destroyed enemies rise again and continue their advance proved devastating to Imperial morale. The Uchten campaign concluded with a demonstration of Imotech's personal combat prowess. When the planetary governor and his elite guard made their last stand in the fortified capital, the Stormlord teleported directly into their bunker with a contingent of Lich Guard. Witnesses who survived described how Imotekh wielded his hyperphase sword and gauntlet of fire with mechanical precision, his movements so fast they appeared blurred even to enhanced human vision. Within minutes, 5 centuries of human rule on Uchten ended, and the planet returned to Necron control. This pattern of conquest repeated across dozens of systems in the Ultima Segmentum. Imperial tacticians noted the distinctive signature of Imotekh operations, the electromagnetic storms that preceded their attacks, the precision targeting of command and control assets, and the relentless advance of their warriors. Most concerning to Imperial High Command was the evidence of learning and adaptation in Imotekh tactics. Each campaign incorporated lessons from previous engagements, with weaknesses in their approach quickly identified and eliminated. The political structure that supported these military operations revealed the complexity of Imotekh governance. Unlike some dynasties where a single pharaoh ruled with absolute authority, Imotekh maintained a hierarchical network of overlords, lords, and cryptechs, each with defined responsibilities and territories. This structure had evolved from pre-biotransference Necrontyr traditions, but had been refined through millions of years of encoded experience. At the apex sat Imotekh himself, holding the rank of pharaoh, though some scholars of xenology debate whether he legitimately inherited this title or claimed it during the confusion of awakening. Below him were the overlords, each responsible for a cluster of star systems. These included figures like Zondrek, whose damaged neural pathways caused him to perceive the 41st millennium as if it were still the war in heaven, and Oberon, whose unwavering loyalty to Zondrek created an unusual power dynamic within the hierarchy. The lords formed the next tier, commanding individual tomb worlds or military expeditions. Among these, the most notorious was Nemesser Zandrek, whose tactical acumen nearly matched Imotech's own, leading to a complex relationship of respect and rivalry between them. The cryptechs operated somewhat outside this chain of command, their specialized knowledge giving them influence disproportionate to their nominal rank. Master cryptechs like Tohalk, the blinded, advised Imotekh directly on matters of technology and ancient lore, sometimes countermanding the decisions of overlords when technical considerations demanded it. This political web was held together by more than the command protocols embedded in Necron neural circuitry. Imotekh instituted a system of incentives and punishments that played upon the vestigial ambitions and fears that remained even in their mechanical minds. Overlords who exceeded their conquest quotas received additional resources and expanded territories. Those who failed faced resource restrictions, or, in extreme cases, forced stasis as an example to others. The expansion of Imotekh influence inevitably brought them into conflict with the realm of Ultramar. The Ultramarines, led by their Primarch Robute Guilliman following his resurrection, recognized the existential threat posed by Imotech's methodical advance. Initial skirmishes occurred in border systems, with Space Marine strike forces attempting to disrupt Necron Tomb awakening before Imotekh forces could fully deploy. These conflicts revealed both strengths and limitations in Imotekh military doctrine. Against conventional forces, their technological superiority and tactical coordination proved overwhelming. Space Marines, however, presented a more complex challenge. The adaptability and individual initiative of the Adeptus Astartes sometimes countered the more programmatic responses of Necron command protocols, particularly among lower-ranking units. Imotekh adapted by deploying specialized assets against Space Marine targets. Triarch Praetorians, ancient even by Necron standards, were tasked with countering Astartes officers, their hyperphase glaives capable of penetrating even Terminator armor. Deathmarks received modified targeting parameters that prioritized apothecaries and standard bearers, disrupting the morale and recovery capabilities of Marine forces. The most significant confrontation occurred in the Kalchai system, where a full company of Ultramarines attempted to prevent the awakening of a major Sodek tomb complex. Imotekh personally commanded the defense, employing a multi-layered strategy that began with conventional Necron warriors absorbing the initial Space Marine assault, followed by flanking maneuvers from units of Lichguard, teleporting directly into the Ultramarine formation. The battle reached its climax when Captain Sicarius led a desperate attack against what appeared to be Imotekh's command position. The Stormlord had anticipated this move, however, deploying a simulacrum, while his actual command node operated from a monolith hovering at the edge of the engagement zone. The trap nearly succeeded in capturing Sicarius, who escaped only through the sacrifice of his command squad. Following this victory, Imotekh implemented a broader strategic vision for dealing with Ultramar. Rather than attempting direct conquest of heavily defended Ultramarine worlds, Sodek forces targeted supply systems and recruitment worlds, gradually constricting the logistical network that supported the realm. This approach reflected Imotekh's patient nature, a willingness to spend centuries achieving objectives that lesser commanders might abandon as too time-consuming. The technological edge that enabled these conquests derived from both ancient Necron innovations and adaptations developed under Imotekh's direction. The Sodek arsenal included standard Necron weaponry like Gauss flayers and Tesla carbines, but with modifications specific to their dynasty. Sodek Gauss weapons featured enhanced power distribution systems that provided more consistent performance over extended engagements, reflecting their doctrine of methodical advance rather than overwhelming initial strikes. Their most distinctive technology, however, was the manipulation of electromagnetic phenomena that earned Imotekh his title of the Stormlord. Specialized cryptechs of the Harbinger of the Storm designation deployed with Sodek forces, carrying devices that could generate localized electromagnetic disturbances. These storms disabled enemy communications, scrambled targeting systems, and sometimes even affected the function of neural implants in augmented human troops. The crown jewel of Sodek technology was the network of quantum entanglement communicators that allowed instantaneous coordination between widely separated forces. Unlike Imperial communications that relied on astropathic transmission or limited-range Vox systems, Sodek command nodes could exchange tactical data across entire sectors without delay or risk of interception. This capability enabled the synchronized attacks that characterized their larger campaigns, with multiple tomb worlds activating simultaneously to overwhelm defensive networks before they could respond coherently. As the Sodek dynasty continued its expansion, internal challenges emerged alongside external conflicts. The hierarchical structure that served them effectively also created competition between overlords seeking to improve their standing with Imotekh. This occasionally led to inefficient allocation of resources, with multiple overlords targeting the same systems to claim credit for their conquest. Imotekh addressed these issues through a formalized system of conquest rights, assigning specific regions to individual overlords and establishing clear metrics for evaluating their performance. The system incorporated traditional Necrontier concepts of dynastic honor, appealing to the vestigial cultural programming that remained even in their mechanical minds. An overlord might be granted exclusive rights to a particular system, but with specific time constraints for securing it. Failure would result in the opportunity passing to a rival. The gleaming emerald halls of Solemnus stand as a testament to the obsessive nature of their master. Unlike the aggressive expansion of the Sodek dynasty, the Nihilakh dynasty has pursued a different path since awakening from the Great Sleep, one focused on acquisition rather than conquest. Their territories, while smaller than those of more militaristic dynasties, are defended with unparalleled determination and technological sophistication. The Nihilakh dynasty emerged from stasis with much of their hierarchy intact, their neural pathways less degraded than many of their counterparts. This relative stability allowed them to maintain more of their pre-biotransference cultural identity, including their renowned appreciation for artifacts and objects of historical significance. Where other dynasties awoke with the singular purpose of reclaiming territory, the Nihilakh emerged with their collecting instinct not only preserved, but enhanced by millions of years of encoded programming. At the center of this dynasty stands Overlord Trazyn, commonly known as the Infinite. Though not a pharaoh, Trazyn wields influence far beyond his technical rank through his unparalleled collection of artifacts and his mastery of technologies that even other Necrons barely comprehend. His form differs from the standard Necron nobility, with a hunched posture that suggests perpetual curiosity and hands modified for the delicate manipulation of artifacts rather than wielding weapons of war. Trazyn's Museum on Solemnness represents the most comprehensive collection of galactic history in existence. The facility extends for hundreds of kilometers beneath the planet's surface, with wings dedicated to specific eras, species, and historical events. Unlike conventional museums, Trazyn's collection includes not merely objects but entire moments in time, preserved through a technology that even the most accomplished cryptechs struggle to explain. The heart of this preservation system lies in tesseract labyrinths, dimensional pocket realms that exist partially outside normal space-time. Originally developed during the War in Heaven to contain dangerous entities, Trazyn has refined this technology to capture and maintain complete historical tableaus. Within these labyrinths, the subjects remain in perfect stasis, unaware of their imprisonment, and preserved exactly as they were at the moment of capture. The collection includes scenes that would leave even the most knowledgeable Imperial historians astounded. One chamber contains a perfect recreation of the Emperor's laboratory beneath the Himalayan mountains, complete with prototype gene manipulation equipment captured during the Unification Wars. Nearby stands a section of trench from the Siege of Vrax, with Death Corps soldiers and traitor Marines frozen in eternal combat. Perhaps most valuable is a chamber rumored to contain a Primarch, though which one remains a subject of speculation, even among the Nihilakh cryptechs who maintain the collection. Trazyn's acquisition methods reflect a calculating intelligence that borders on the theatrical. Rather than simply taking artifacts by force, he often orchestrates elaborate schemes to obtain his prizes under specific circumstances that enhance their historical value. When targeting the Crimson Fists chapter, for instance, he manipulated Orc-Wa movements to force a particular company into a defensive position that mirrored an ancient Necrontyr last stand, before capturing the entire scene for his collection. The Overlord's most ambitious acquisition occurred during the fall of Cadia, where he arrived not to conquer, but to preserve what he recognized as a pivotal moment in galactic history. Deploying a specialized Tesseract vault, he captured a cross-section of the conflict, including Astra Militarum defenders, Black Legion attackers, and even fragments of the Cadian pylons themselves. In an uncharacteristic moment of apparent altruism, he also released portions of his collection to aid the Imperial defense, though this action served his own inscrutable purposes rather than any loyalty to humanity. Unlike most Necron nobility who view themselves as rightful rulers returning to claim their dominion, Trazyn sees himself as a curator of history. His perspective spans millions of years, allowing him to recognize patterns and connections that even the longest-lived Eldar might miss. This vast temporal perspective informs his collecting priorities, as he often acquires objects that seem mundane, but which his calculations suggest will become historically significant. The broader Nihilakh dynasty shares Trazyn's collecting instinct, though with less sophistication and more martial focus. Their fleets patrol ancient Necrontyr territories not to conquer, but to recover artifacts and technology from their former empire. These expeditions follow precise patterns established before the Great Sleep, with ships emerging from the same spaceports at intervals determined by stellar alignments that hold significance in Necrontyr chronometric traditions. Nihilakh vessels are distinctive even among Necron craft, with more ornate designs that incorporate decorative elements reminiscent of pre-biotransference architecture. Their crescent-shaped destroyers feature elaborate filigree along the leading edges, serving no practical purpose, but maintaining cultural continuity with their ancient past. Each ship serves as a mobile museum of sorts, with central chambers displaying artifacts recovered during their expeditions. The dynasty's defensive posture becomes apparent in the construction of their tomb worlds. Where Imotekh facilities focus on rapid deployment of forces, Nihilakh complexes are designed as concentric rings of defense, with the most valuable collections at the center. These defenses incorporate technologies specifically calibrated to counter the methods of potential thieves, with different systems targeting Eldar webway incursions, Adeptus Mechanicus tunneling techniques, or even the psychic methods employed by certain Chaos factions. This defensive mindset extends to their campaign planning. When Nihilakh forces do engage in conflict, they typically do so to protect existing holdings rather than to expand. Their battlefield deployments emphasize area denial and target neutralization over territorial control. Immortals equipped with Tesla carbines establish overlapping fields of fire that make approach impossible, while specialized Imotekh constructs patrol the perimeters, their programming optimized to detect and eliminate infiltration attempts. The Nihilakh relationship with the Adeptus Mechanicus exemplifies their pragmatic approach to other species. Both factions share an obsession with ancient technology, though their purposes differ fundamentally. The Mechanicus seeks to understand and replicate old technology, while the Nihilakh simply wish to possess it as part of their historical record. This overlap in interest has led to countless conflicts across the galaxy as both groups converge on newly discovered archaeological sites. A notable example occurred in the Thanatos system, where Explorator Fleet Gamma 119 discovered the remains of a pre-Great Sleep Necron manufacturing facility. The Mechanicus forces had barely begun their analysis when Nihilakh ships emerged from the system's Manville point. Rather than immediately attacking, the Necron commander, a lord named Nemesis Kepra, established Vox communication with the Explorator Magos and proposed a temporary arrangement. The Mechanicus would be permitted to study certain aspects of the facility for 30 standard Terran days, after which they would withdraw. In exchange, they would provide the Nihilakh with data on other potential archaeological sites in neighboring sectors. This arrangement, while unusual, proceeded as agreed until a zealous tech priest attempted to remove a particularly significant artifact for transport to Mars. The Necron response was immediate and overwhelming. Contempt wraiths phased through the facility's walls, while deathmarks teleported directly to the location of the transgression. Within minutes, the offending tech priest and his retinue had been reduced to their component atoms by precision Gauss fire. Remarkably, the Necrons made no move against other Mechanicus personnel who had respected the agreement, allowing them to complete their studies and depart as scheduled. This incident illustrates the Nihilakh approach to diplomacy, willing to accommodate other species' interests when they align with their own, but ruthlessly efficient in punishing transgressions against their collections. Similar arrangements have been documented with rogue traders, inquisitorial archaeological teams, and even certain Eldar corsairs known for their interest in historical artifacts. The Nihilakh military, while smaller than that of expansionist dynasties, maintains qualitative advantages that make them formidable opponents. Their warriors bear the dynasty's characteristic emerald and gold coloration, with officers distinguished by additional gold detailing on their shoulder pauldrons and cranial crests. Their weapon systems emphasize precision over raw destructive power, with modified Gauss weapons capable of disintegrating specific materials while leaving others untouched, a capability particularly useful when recovering fragile artifacts from contested sites. Imotekh constructs play an especially prominent role in Nihilakh operations. Beyond the standard spiders and scarabs common to all dynasties, they employ specialized variants designed specifically for archaeological and preservation work. Imotekh archivists, spindly constructs with dozens of manipulator arms, can extract embedded artifacts from surrounding material with micrometer precision. Accompanying them are Imotekh catalogers, floating spherical devices that scan and record the exact position and condition of each item before it is removed, ensuring that contextual information is preserved alongside the artifacts themselves. The most distinctive Nihilak units are the Honorable Guardians, Lichguard variants whose programming has been modified to prioritize the protection of artifacts over even the safety of Necron nobility. These warriors carry specialized dispersion shields that can be calibrated to emit certain energy frequencies while blocking others, allowing them to create safe corridors through hostile environments for the transport of sensitive materials. Their hyperphase swords incorporate scanning technology that identifies the molecular composition of potential threats, adjusting their phase frequency to maximize effectiveness against specific targets. The Nihilak's relationship with the Khatan shards differs from other dynasties as well, where most Necrons keep these dangerous entities imprisoned as weapons of last resort. Trazyn maintains several in his collection as historical specimens. These shards are contained within specialized tesseract labyrinths with additional layers of security, displayed alongside detailed records of the Khatan's role in ancient Necrontyr history. Rumors persist that Trazyn possesses fragments of Khatan entities thought destroyed during the rebellion, preserved as the only remaining examples of their kind. Despite their less aggressive stance, the Nihilak have engaged in significant conflicts when their collections were threatened. The most notable occurred when a splinter fleet of Hive Fleet Kraken approached Solemnus. Recognizing the Tyranids as the ultimate destroyers of history, consuming all in their path and leaving nothing behind, Trazyn implemented defense protocols of unprecedented scale. The entire outer crust of Solemnus was sacrificed, rigged with molecular destabilizers that reduced the first wave of Tyranid organisms to their component atoms, which were then harvested by specialized Imotekh constructs. As subsequent waves approached, Trazyn released combat-ready exhibits from his collection. Regiments of Astra Militarum from a dozen different eras fought alongside Space Marines bearing obsolete mark patterns of power armor. Chaos cultists found themselves allied with Eldar aspect warriors, all directed by Necron command protocols, and fighting with the mechanical precision of museum pieces performing their designated function. The Tyranid advance was halted not through conventional military superiority, but through a bewildering array of disparate technologies and tactics that the hive mind could not efficiently counter. The Nihilak's collecting activities have intensified in recent centuries as the galaxy enters a period of unprecedented upheaval. Trazyn has described the current era as historically dense, a time when significant events occur with unusual frequency, creating abundant opportunities for acquisition. His agents have been observed at virtually every major conflict of the 41st millennium, from the Gothic War to the devastation of Baal, always watching from the periphery and waiting for the perfect moment to claim their prizes. This increased activity has brought the Nihilak into more frequent contact with Imperial forces, leading to a complex relationship that defies simple classification as alliance or enmity. When the interests of both parties align, typically against existential threats like Tyranids or certain chaos incursions, temporary cooperation can occur. More often, however, the Nihilak appear without warning, take what they desire, and vanish before effective resistance can be mounted. The amber glow of Mephrit weaponry cuts through the void like miniature suns, a fitting signature for a dynasty whose mastery of stellar manipulation has earned them the title Star Killers across the galaxy. Unlike the methodical expansion of the Imotekh or the acquisitive nature of the Nihilak, the Mephrit dynasty has awakened with a singular focus on destructive capability, their hyperspace weaponry representing the pinnacle of Necron military technology. The Mephrit dynasty's tomb worlds cluster around unstable stars, a deliberate choice dating back to their pre-biotransference days, when the Necrontyr of this region developed specialized technologies to harness and contain the volatile energies of their local stellar bodies. These ancient techniques evolved over millions of years into what Imperial scholars now classify as solar manipulation technology, a branch of Necron science that treats stars not as natural phenomena, but as potential weapons and power sources. At the core of Mephrit technology lies their unique approach to the fundamental Necron Gauss weapons. Where standard Gauss flayers strip matter apart at the molecular level, Mephrit variants incorporate hyperspace induction fields that temporarily shift the target's atomic structure partially into another dimension before violently returning it to real space. This process creates a cascading energy release that Imperial tech priests have likened to miniature supernovas occurring at the point of impact. The distinctive amber energy signature of these weapons comes from this dimensional transition, with the color spectrum shifted toward the solar frequencies that Mephrit engineers have always favored. The most feared of these weapons is the Solar Staff, carried by Mephrit lords and overlords as both a symbol of authority and a devastating implement of destruction. Each staff contains a fragment of captured stellar material suspended in a tesseract field at its head. When activated, this material creates a connection to its parent star, channeling a fraction of its energy through the hyperspace conduits woven into the weapon's structure. A single strike from a solar staff can reduce a space marine in Terminator armor to superheated vapor, while a concentrated beam can penetrate the hull of a light tank. Mephrit warriors carry enhanced Gauss flares distinguished by their increased power consumption and distinctive focusing arrays. These modifications sacrifice some of the standard weapons' reliability for significantly increased destructive potential. In battlefield encounters, Imperial forces have reported that Mephrit Gauss weapons can penetrate armor that would resist conventional Necron attacks, though they require more frequent energy cycling, creating tactical vulnerabilities during these momentary recharge phases. The dynasty's larger war machines incorporate solar technology on a more dramatic scale. Their Doomsday arcs feature central energy cannons powered by miniaturized stellar cores, capable of projecting beams that match capital ship weaponry in destructive potential. The distinctive feature of Mephrit variants is the sustained burn effect. Targets struck by these weapons continue to experience molecular breakdown for several minutes after the initial impact, as hyperspace particles gradually return to real space within the damaged area. The leadership structure of the Mephrit dynasty reflects their focus on destructive capability. Unlike the complex political hierarchies of other dynasties, Mephrit organization follows a strictly meritocratic system based on demonstrated destructive achievements. Their current pharaoh, Mephthes the Illuminator, earned his position after developing a technique to induce artificial solar flares in stable stars, demonstrating this capability by rendering 3 inhabited worlds in the Pergamum system uninhabitable during a single campaign. Beneath Mephthes serve a council of destroyers, Necron lords who have embraced the nihilistic destroyer cult philosophy, but retained enough of their tactical acumen to serve in command roles. This unusual tolerance for the normally shunned destroyer cult stems from the Mephrit dynasty's pre-biotransference cultural emphasis on destructive power as the ultimate expression of authority. Where other dynasties view the single-minded annihilation focus of destroyers as a form of madness, Mephrit tradition sees it as merely an extreme expression of their foundational values. This cultural affinity for destruction extends to the dynasty's unusual relationship with flayed ones. These degraded Necrons, infected with the curse of Landugger, emerge from Mephrit tomb worlds at a rate nearly triple that of other dynasties. Cryptech theorists attribute this to a resonance between the Flayer virus and the hyperspace technologies that saturate Mephrit facilities, creating a dimensional weakness that allows the curse to spread more readily. Rather than destroying these afflicted warriors, Mephrit commanders have developed specialized containment protocols that allow them to deploy flayed ones as shock troops, releasing them against enemy positions before more valuable dynasty assets are committed. The most notorious demonstration of Mephrit destructive capability came during their conflict with the Tiao Empire's Fourth Sphere expansion. As Tiao colony ships entered the Nephilim Corridor, a region of space claimed by dormant Mephrit tomb worlds, automated defense systems triggered the awakening of several minor Necron lords. Initial Tiao encounters with these forces were dismissed as isolated pockets of resistance, with Earthcast analysts grossly underestimating the threat level. The Mephrit response escalated methodically. First came precision strikes against outlying Tiao outposts, with small Necron forces testing the aliens' defensive capabilities. These engagements allowed Mephrit tacticians to catalog Tiao weapons technology and battlefield doctrine, identifying vulnerabilities in their reliance on electromagnetic communications and drone support systems. The data gathered was transmitted via quantum entanglement to the dynasty's primary tomb complex on Nephilim 4, where Pharaoh Mephthes personally analyzed the findings. The counterattack began with a technological assault that the Tiao had never encountered before. Specialized Imotekh constructs infiltrated Tiao power distribution networks, introducing hyperspace fluctuation devices that caused catastrophic overloads in their plasma containment systems. As emergency protocols diverted resources to contain these failures, the main Mephrit forces emerged from hidden webway portals established millennia earlier during the dynasty's original expansion. The Tiao's superior mobility, typically their greatest advantage, proved ineffective against the Mephrit's hyperspace weaponry. Their hammerhead gunships and crisis battlesuits found their armor molecularly destabilized by enhanced Gauss fire, while their pulse weapons barely registered against the self-repairing necrodermis of the Necron forces. Ethereal Leadership Councils ordered a strategic withdrawal to more defensible positions, abandoning their forward bases in the Nephilim corridor. This retreat played directly into the Mephrit strategy. As Tiao forces consolidated around their core colony worlds, Mephrit doom scythes conducted high-altitude reconnaissance, identifying the locations of planetary shield generators and atmospheric processors. Night scythes then deployed, flayed one terror units near civilian population centers, forcing the Tiao to divert defensive resources to protect their settlers, while the main Necron force targeted critical infrastructure. The conflict reached its devastating climax at the battle for the Tiao colony world of Kyson. After systematically eliminating the planet's orbital defenses, Pharaoh Mephthes arrived in his personal command barge, a massive construct of living metal surrounded by a corona of captured solar energy. From this platform, he deployed the dynasty's most fearsome weapon, a solar harvester, a massive crystalline structure that created a direct hyperspace connection to the system's star. Tiao Earthcast scientists watched in horror as their instruments recorded the star's energy output, increasing by 17% within hours of the device's activation. Surface temperatures on Kyson rose dramatically, boiling away bodies of water and igniting vast forest fires. As evacuation ships attempted to flee the doomed world, they found their engines failing as the solar harvester's influence extended throughout the system, creating hyperspace distortions that rendered conventional propulsion increasingly ineffective. The final phase of the harvester's operation created a controlled stellar flare directed specifically at Kyson. The planet's surface was scoured of all organic matter, leaving only the most durable structures partially intact. More importantly, from the Mephrit perspective, the hyperspace backwash from this event charged their warriors' power cores to unprecedented levels, allowing them to operate at peak capacity without recharging for nearly a standard Terran year. This demonstration of stellar manipulation capabilities sent shockwaves through the Tiao Empire. Subsequent encounters with Mephrit forces were met with immediate withdrawal orders, with Tiao commanders recognizing that conventional military responses were ineffective against an enemy capable of weaponizing stars themselves. The Fourth Sphere expansion was effectively halted along its western front, with several previously claimed systems abandoned to create a buffer zone between Tiao space and known Mephrit territory. The dynasty's internal structure has been significantly shaped by their disproportionate connection to both destroyers and flayed ones. Unlike most Necron dynasties, where these afflicted warriors are isolated or destroyed, Mephrit tomb complexes include specialized containment zones where these forces are stored between deployments. These areas feature enhanced dimensional stabilizers that partially suppress the more extreme manifestations of their conditions, allowing them to be directed more effectively in combat. This tolerance has created a unique command structure where conventional Necron lords operate alongside destroyer lords in a tense but functional hierarchy. Strategic planning sessions often devolve into philosophical debates about the most efficient means of destruction, with traditional commanders favoring targeted elimination of enemy leadership and infrastructure, while destroyer lords advocate for indiscriminate annihilation of all life forms encountered. The Mephrit approach to warfare extends beyond conventional battlefield engagements to include environmental manipulation on a planetary scale. Their cryptechs have developed specialized scarab variants that burrow into a planet's crust, establishing networks of hyperspace tap points that can destabilize tectonic plates or alter magnetic field patterns. These techniques allow them to render worlds uninhabitable without committing significant military assets, creating dead zones around their territories that discourage encroachment by other species. The dynasty's Imotekh constructs reflect their focus on solar technology, with distinctive modifications not seen in other Necron forces. Their spiders incorporate radiation processing units that allow them to operate in environments that would disable standard models, such as the coronas of stars or the surfaces of irradiated death worlds. These specialized constructs are often deployed as the first wave of a Mephrit invasion, establishing beachheads in environments too hostile for conventional forces. Mephrit tomb ships, massive space-faring vessels that serve as mobile headquarters for their expansion efforts, feature external hulls composed of specialized light-capturing necrodermis. These surfaces absorb stellar radiation and channel it to internal power cores, allowing the vessels to operate indefinitely while in proximity to stars. This capability enables a distinctive Mephrit tactic of positioning their fleets within a star's chromosphere, using the intense radiation and magnetic interference to mask their presence, until they launch surprise attacks against unsuspecting targets. The most feared aspect of Mephrit technology remains their ability to destabilize and potentially destroy stars. While the full destruction of a star requires resources beyond what most awakened tomb worlds can currently deploy, the dynasty has demonstrated the ability to induce solar flares, create radiation storms, and temporarily alter stellar output in ways that can render entire systems uninhabitable. Imperial astrocartographers have documented several cases of stable stars exhibiting sudden anomalous behavior in regions of space where Mephrit activity has been detected. These stellar manipulation capabilities stem from the dynasty's ancient experience with their own radiation-saturated homeworld. Before biotransference, the Necron tier of the Mephrit territory developed technologies to shield themselves from their star's deadly emissions, gradually advancing to the point where they could influence these emissions directly. This knowledge was exponentially enhanced by Catan-derived science during the War in Heaven, resulting in the current technologies that allow them to treat stars as both weapons and power sources. The ruins of Charnavok tomb worlds tell a story of catastrophe unlike any other Necron dynasty. Where other factions emerged from the Great Sleep with varying degrees of functionality, the Charnavok dynasty awoke to find their empire shattered almost beyond recognition. Astronomical surveys conducted by their first reactivated cryptechs revealed a grim reality. Nearly 78% of their original tomb complexes had been destroyed completely, while another 15% had suffered critical system failures that rendered their occupants non-functional or irretrievably damaged. This devastation stemmed from a cosmic misfortune unique to Charnavok territory. During the 60 million years of the Great Sleep, their sector experienced an unusually high concentration of stellar events, supernovas, gamma-ray bursts, and even a localized space-time anomaly that Imperial cartographers would later designate as the Nephilim Rift. These phenomena bombarded their dormant worlds with radiation and gravitational stresses that overwhelmed even the sophisticated protection systems of Necron architecture. The Charnavok's primary throne world of Imotekh suffered perhaps the most dramatic fate. Once a magnificent necropolis housing billions of dormant Necrons, the planet was caught in the gravitational wake of a passing dark matter cluster approximately 32 million years into the Great Sleep. The resulting tidal forces tore the planet's crust into fragments, exposing the stasis chambers beneath to the void of space. When the dynasty's automated revival protocols finally activated, only the deepest levels of the tomb complex remained intact, with barely 3% of the original population surviving. This catastrophic loss might have destroyed other dynasties, but the Charnavok responded with remarkable adaptability. Pharaon Thasar, one of the few noble-rank Necrons to emerge from Zaponek's ruins, implemented emergency protocols that prioritized the recovery of functional technology over territorial reclamation. Specialized Imotekh constructs were dispatched to scan the debris field that had once been their throne world, salvaging every intact component and power source they could locate. Thasar's necrodermis form bears the scars of this disaster in ways unusual for a Necron. Where most damage to living metal eventually repairs itself, the Pharaon's frame shows permanent deformities, a partially collapsed shoulder carapace, asymmetrical facial structure, and a limping gait caused by misaligned leg servos. These imperfections remain by choice rather than necessity, a constant reminder to his subjects of the dynasty's brush with extinction and their subsequent perseverance. The Charnavok color scheme reflects their adaptive nature, with their necrodermis bodies displaying a base of deep copper overlaid with turquoise energy pathways. This unusual combination evolved from practical necessity. The copper tones came from trace elements absorbed during emergency repairs, while the turquoise energy signature resulted from their modified power distribution systems. What began as evidence of makeshift repairs has become a proud dynastic identifier, with newly constructed warriors deliberately given the same distinctive appearance. Unlike the rigid hierarchies maintained by dynasties like the Charnavok command structure, evolved into something more flexible out of necessity. With so many noble-rank Necrons lost, Thasar authorized the promotion of lower-tier personalities into leadership roles based on their functionality rather than their original status. Former maintenance cryptechs found themselves commanding military operations, while warrior-grade Necrons with unusually intact neural pathways were upgraded to serve as field commanders. This meritocratic approach extended to their reconstruction efforts. The dynasty's first priority after awakening was not conquest but survival, with their limited resources focused on establishing secure power generation facilities and repair centers. Charnavok cryptechs developed innovative techniques for repurposing damaged necrodermis components, creating hybrid constructs that combined elements from different classes of Necron technology. These jury-rigged creations lacked the elegant symmetry of traditional Necron design, but functioned effectively despite their unconventional appearance. The most significant innovation emerged from necessity when the dynasty discovered that many of their warriors had suffered irreparable neural degradation during the catastrophic tomb failures. With insufficient intact warriors to defend even their remaining holdings, Cryptek Vonok developed a revolutionary solution: distributed consciousness networks. By linking multiple damaged Necron warriors through quantum entanglement, their fragmented neural patterns could function as a single, coherent entity. These composite warriors moved with unusual synchronization, their individual bodies operating as components of a unified system rather than independent units. This technology proved so successful that it became a standard feature of Charnavok military doctrine, with even intact warriors incorporated into these networks to enhance coordination during complex operations. Imperial forces encountering these linked battle groups have reported disorienting experiences, as targeting what appears to be the command unit has no effect on the group's cohesion, with leadership functions instantly redistributing across the network when any single node is damaged. The Charnavok approach to territorial expansion differs dramatically from other dynasties. Rather than attempting to reclaim their original holdings immediately, they adopted a pragmatic strategy focused on resource acquisition and gradual growth. Their survey teams identified worlds rich in materials suitable for necrodermis production, prioritizing these targets over historically significant locations or strategically positioned systems. This resource-first approach led to unusual target selection that initially confused Imperial tacticians. The Charnavok would bypass seemingly valuable worlds to secure uninhabited planets with specific mineral compositions, establishing processing facilities that converted raw materials into the specialized components needed for Necron repair and reproduction. Only after securing these resource bases would they turn their attention to more conventional strategic targets. The dynasty's most innovative adaptation appears in their use of scarab swarms. Where other Necron forces employ these constructs primarily for battlefield repairs and material processing, the Charnavok developed specialized variants designed specifically for rapid colonization. These Genesis scarabs contain sophisticated molecular assemblers that can convert raw planetary materials directly into Necron infrastructure, allowing the dynasty to establish functional outposts on newly conquered worlds within days rather than the months required by conventional methods. A demonstration of this capability occurred during their seizure of the mining world Calibrax IV. After neutralizing the minimal Imperial defenses, Charnavok forces deployed approximately 500,000 Genesis scarabs across the planet's surface. Within 72 hours, these constructs had consumed nearly 30% of the planet's exposed mineral deposits, converting them into a network of interconnected Necron structures. By the time Imperial reinforcements arrived 2 weeks later, the planet had been transformed into a fully functional Necron outpost with operational defenses and manufacturing capabilities. This efficiency in resource utilization extends to their approach to conquered populations. Unlike many Necron dynasties that simply exterminate all organic life encountered, the Charnavok have developed more nuanced protocols that evaluate potential usefulness before determining a species' fate. On several occasions, they have permitted human mining operations to continue under supervision, with the workers unaware that their Adeptus Mechanicus, overseers, had been replaced by sophisticated Necron proxies using holographic disguise technology. The most controversial aspect of Charnavok's strategy has been their willingness to form temporary alliances with organic races when circumstances warrant. These pragmatic arrangements emerge from cold calculation rather than any genuine diplomatic inclination, but they nevertheless represent a significant deviation from typical Necron behavior. The dynasty's severely depleted numbers make such accommodations necessary, allowing them to conserve resources while manipulating other factions to eliminate mutual threats. An example of this approach occurred in the Viridian system, where a Tyranid splinter fleet threatened both Charnavok mining operations and human colonial holdings. Rather than confronting the Tyranids directly, Thassar dispatched emissaries to the system governor, providing detailed intelligence on the Hive fleet's composition and vulnerabilities. This information allowed Imperial forces to repel the initial Tyranid assault, preserving both human and Necron assets in the system. Only after the Tyranid threat had been reduced did the Charnavok reveal their true intentions, systematically isolating and capturing specific human facilities of interest while leaving others untouched. These tactical alliances have extended to other races as well. Charnavok forces have been observed coordinating with Eldar Corsairs against Chaos incursions, sharing targeting data with Tiao hunter cadres during Orkwa interceptions, and even engaging in limited technology exchanges with rogue elements of the Adeptus Mechanicus. In each case, the dynasty maintains rigid parameters for these interactions, with quantum-locked failsafes ensuring that any technology temporarily shared cannot be reverse-engineered or used against them. The dynasty's approach to warfare reflects their resource limitations and adaptive mindset. Where dynasties like the Imotekh rely on overwhelming force and the Mefrit on devastating firepower, Charnavok commanders employ precision strikes and targeted decapitation attacks. Their forces typically deploy in smaller, more mobile groups, focusing on eliminating enemy leadership and critical infrastructure rather than engaging in protracted battles of attrition they cannot afford to sustain. This surgical approach is exemplified by their extensive use of death marks, specialized Necron snipers capable of dimensional shifting to reach otherwise inaccessible firing positions. Charnavok deathmarks operate with expanded targeting parameters compared to those of other dynasties, authorized to eliminate not just military leaders, but also civilian administrators, technical specialists, and even religious figures whose removal might destabilize enemy resistance. Imperial commanders facing Charnavok forces have learned to implement complex security protocols, rotating command personnel frequently, and establishing redundant leadership structures to mitigate the impact of these targeted assassinations. The most distinctive element of Charnavok military technology is their advanced phase shifters. Building on standard Necron dimensional manipulation capabilities, their cryptechs have developed systems that allow warriors to exist partially out of phase with normal space-time for extended periods. This technology serves both offensive and defensive purposes, making their forces difficult to target while allowing them to bypass conventional defenses by simply shifting through solid barriers. These phase technologies reach their apex in the Eternity Gate, a large-scale dimensional portal that allows instantaneous redeployment of forces between secured locations. Unlike the more common Necron teleportation methods that require significant power expenditure for each use, the Eternity Gates establish permanent connections between fixed points, allowing troops and materials to flow freely between them with minimal energy cost. This network of dimensional shortcuts has proven crucial to the dynasty's survival, enabling them to defend widely separated holdings despite their limited numbers. The Charnavok relationship with their Khatan shards differs notably from other dynasties. With their resources too limited to maintain the elaborate containment systems typically used to harness these dangerous entities, they instead developed more efficient, if riskier, methods of utilization. Rather than deploying Khatan shards in their conventional prismatic forms, Charnavok cryptechs fragment them further into splinters, smaller, more manageable pieces that can be integrated directly into their command protocols. These Khatan splinters provide enhanced capabilities to Charnavok officers without requiring the massive energy expenditure of full shard deployment. A lord equipped with a splinter of the Deceiver gains limited access to that entity's reality-bending powers, able to generate convincing illusions or manipulate probability in small but tactically significant ways. The trade-off comes in increased risk of influence from the Khatan fragment, with affected commanders sometimes exhibiting behavioral patterns reminiscent of the entity they carry. Among the awakened Necron dynasties that now stalk the stars, few names inspire such immediate dread as the Maynarch. While the Sodek conquer methodically and the Nihilak collect with purpose, the Maynarch dynasty exists for a singular purpose: annihilation executed with such ruthless efficiency that even other Necron dynasties regard them with caution. The Maynarch's reputation for extreme aggression predates even the war in heaven. Ancient records recovered from shattered tomb worlds suggest that the pre-biotransference Necron tier of the Maynarch territories were considered dangerous extremists by their contemporaries. Their original homeworlds orbited a cluster of pulsars that bombarded their planets with levels of radiation lethal, even by Necron tier standards. This environmental crucible produced a culture obsessed with endurance through overwhelming force. If they could not escape their deadly stars, they would become strong enough to survive them. When the Silent King made his fateful bargain with the Khatan, the Maynarch were among the most enthusiastic supporters of biotransference. Their Pharaon Zunbacker, known even then as the Mother of Oblivion, saw in necrodermis bodies the ultimate expression of their cultural ideal, forms that could endure any environment, any attack, any passage of time. The Maynarch entered the transformation chambers willingly, even eagerly, with minimal resistance compared to other dynasties. What emerged was something that disturbed even the architects of biotransference. The Maynarch nobles retained more of their personality than most, but what persisted was primarily their capacity for calculated violence, stripped of whatever restraint or broader cultural context might have balanced it in their organic forms. Their warriors, meanwhile, displayed unusual cohesion and predatory instinct, operating with a pack mentality rarely seen in the typically regimented Necron forces. The Maynarch necrodermis bodies reflect their aggressive nature. Where most Necron warriors bear the uniform skeletal appearance of their kind, Maynarch troops feature additional armor plating, reinforced joints, and weapon housings integrated directly into their limbs. Their color scheme consists of deep crimson energy pathways against burnished bronze plating, often adorned with glyphs that Imperial xenolinguists have tentatively translated as statements of ownership and dominance. These markings declare not merely territorial claims, but existential ones, assertions that all matter within their reach exists solely at their sufferance. During the War in Heaven, the Maynarch earned a reputation as the dynasty dispatched to situations requiring total eradication rather than mere defeat of enemy forces. Where diplomatic solutions might have been possible, the arrival of Maynarch forces signaled that such options had been explicitly rejected. They specialized in xenocide campaigns, systematically eliminating not just opposing armies but entire species, leaving nothing but sterile worlds in their wake. This approach proved especially effective against the psychically attuned servitor races created by the Old Ones. The Maynarch developed specialized disruption fields that created zones of intense psychic disturbance, driving telepathic species to madness before their physical forms were destroyed. These techniques were so effective that other dynasties began incorporating watered-down versions into their own strategic doctrines, though none matched the Maynarch's mastery of terror as a tactical weapon. The dynasty's unusual relationship with the Khatan became apparent during this period. While all Necron forces served the star gods during the War in Heaven, the Maynarch displayed a particular affinity for the most destructive of these entities. Cryptek records suggest that Zunbacher maintained direct communication channels with multiple Khatans simultaneously, receiving instructions and technological insights that were not shared with other dynasties. This special relationship granted them access to weapons and techniques at the bleeding edge of even Khatan-derived science. When the Necrons eventually rebelled against the Khatan, the Maynarch's role proved unexpectedly pivotal. Their intimate knowledge of Khatan behavior patterns and vulnerabilities, gained through their unusually close service, made them extraordinarily effective hunters. The dynasty captured and shattered more Khatan than any other faction, adding these imprisoned shards to their already formidable arsenal. Rumors persist that Zunbacher retained certain fragments for study rather than complete containment, seeking to extract further knowledge from these dangerous entities. After the Silent King ordered the Great Sleep, the Maynarch entered stasis with the same methodical precision that characterized their military operations. Their tomb worlds, located in regions of space hostile to organic life, were sealed with defenses that incorporated lessons learned from 60 million years of warfare. These systems proved remarkably effective. When the dynasty began awakening in the late 41st millennium, they did so with greater coordination and preserved military capacity than most of their peers. The first documented Imperial encounter with awakened Maynarch forces occurred in the year 903 of the 41st millennium, when an Adeptus Mechanicus explorator fleet investigated unusual energy readings in the Orpheus sector of Segmentum Tempestus. What they found was the beginning of what Imperial historians would later name the Orphean War, a conflict that would demonstrate the full horror of Maynarch military doctrine to the Imperium of man. The Maynarch approach to warfare differs fundamentally from conventional military theory. Where most armies seek to defeat enemy forces to achieve strategic objectives, the Maynarch view the very existence of opposition as an intolerable offense. Their campaigns begin not with targeted strikes against military assets, but with systematic attacks on civilian infrastructure, environmental systems, and cultural centers. By the time military confrontation occurs, the enemy's society has often already begun to collapse from within. This strategy was displayed with terrible efficiency during the Orphean War. Rather than immediately engaging Imperial defense forces, Maynarch scout elements conducted meticulous surveillance of population centers, industrial hubs, and agricultural zones. When the main assault began, it targeted food production and water purification facilities first, followed by power generation and atmospheric processors. Military installations were deliberately bypassed, isolated, and left to wither as the worlds around them died. The Orphean War also showcased the dynasty's mastery of terror tactics. Maynarch Flayed Ones, already among the most disturbing of Necron units, were deployed not as frontline combatants but as psychological warfare assets. These degraded Necrons would infiltrate civilian populations, conducting selective abductions and leaving mutilated remains in highly visible locations. Imperial morale reports from this period describe unprecedented rates of suicide among civilian populations and combat stress breakdown among veteran troops who had previously served against chaos forces without incident. The technological edge that enables Maynarch dominance comes not from any single superweapon, but from incremental advantages across their entire arsenal. Their Gauss weapons operate at power settings approximately 23% higher than those of other dynasties, sacrificing ammunition efficiency for increased destructive potential. Their quantum shielding incorporates reactive harmonics that adapt to enemy weapon frequencies in real time, becoming increasingly resistant to weapons that have already struck them once. Most distinctive are their Imotekh constructs, which exhibit behaviors more reminiscent of predatory organisms than mechanical servitors. Maynarch scarabs swarm in complex patterns that suggest rudimentary collective intelligence, while their wraiths demonstrate hunting behaviors, including ambush tactics and coordinated encirclement maneuvers. These constructs often bear additional weaponry not seen in their counterparts from other dynasties, such as molecular disassemblers on scarabs or phase lances on spiders. The command structure of the Maynarch remains centered around Zunbacker, the Mother of Oblivion, whose existence has been confirmed through quantum intercepts of Necron communication networks. Below her serves a council of overlords known as the Harvest Elite, each responsible for specific aspects of the dynasty's operations. Unlike the territorial divisions common in other dynasties, Maynarch authority is divided functionally. The Overlord of Culling oversees population elimination, while the Overlord of Rendering manages resource extraction from conquered worlds. This specialization extends throughout their forces, with warrior cohorts designated for specific tactical roles rather than as general combat units. Immortals bearing Tesla carbines are organized into suppression phalanxes, tasked with area denial and crowd control. Lichguard units serve not only as bodyguards for nobility, but as execution squads, deployed to eliminate enemy leadership with methodical precision. Even their death marks operate differently, functioning as forward observers who designate targets for mass fire rather than as individual snipers. The full extent of Maynarch territory remains unknown to Imperial cartographers, but analysis of their attack patterns suggests a domain encompassing at least 17 star systems in the galactic southeast. These holdings appear deliberately selected for their inhospitality to organic life, including worlds orbiting neutron stars, systems saturated with radiation from recent supernovae, and planets with toxic atmospheres. Such environments pose no challenge to Necron physiology, while providing natural deterrence against exploration or colonization by other species. The dynasty's approach to captured worlds demonstrates their fundamental difference from other Necron factions, where the Sodek might establish permanent garrisons and the Nihilak might search for artifacts of interest. The Maynarch implement what xenobiologists have termed total biosphere reprocessing. This procedure begins with atmospheric alteration to eliminate respiratory-dependent life forms, followed by systematic irradiation of surface areas to destroy plant life and microorganisms. The final stage involves Imotekh constructs harvesting all remaining organic material for conversion into energy to power Maynarch systems. The result is worlds transformed into barren, radiation-bathed wastelands suitable only for Necron habitation, a state the Maynarch appear to consider ideal. These processed planets serve as forward bases for further expansion, with automated defenses calibrated to eliminate any organic matter detected, down to the bacterial level. The message is clear: the Maynarch do not seek to rule over other life forms or even to exploit them as resources. They intend to eradicate them entirely as unwelcome contaminants in their domain. During the Orphean War, this approach resulted in the complete loss of 17 Imperial worlds, with partial losses on another 23 systems. The death toll exceeded 8 billion confirmed casualties, with millions more unaccounted for. The Imperial response, spearheaded by Battlefleet Tempestus and elements of the Minotaur's Space Marine chapter, encountered technological disparities that rendered conventional tactics ineffective. Particularly notable was the Battle of Amara Prime, where 3 companies of Minotaur space marines supported by 2 regiments of Astra Militarum armor attempted to hold the planetary capital against a Maynarch assault. The Necron forces bypassed prepared defensive positions entirely, using phase shifter technology to emerge directly within the city's central administrative district. Rather than engaging the Space Marines immediately, they systematically destroyed water treatment facilities, atmospheric regulators, and food storage warehouses, effectively condemning the civilian population before turning their attention to military targets. When combat was joined, the Maynarch deployed specialized anti-Astartes units equipped with hyperphase weapons, calibrated to disrupt the molecular bonding of ceramite armor. These weapons created catastrophic failures in power armor systems, with field reports describing space marines whose protection simply disintegrated around them in cascading waves of molecular breakdown. Of the 300 Minotaurs deployed to Amara Prime, only 47 survived to be evacuated, most suffering severe radiation poisoning from exposure to Maynarch weaponry. The technological sophistication displayed during these engagements suggests the Maynarch maintained closer ties to certain Khatan than was previously understood. Their weapons incorporate principles that appear to violate established laws of physics, particularly in their manipulation of phase space and molecular cohesion. Some Ordo Xenos inquisitors have theorized that the dynasty may have preserved technical knowledge from the war in heaven that other Necrons chose to abandon, possibly due to ethical concerns that the Maynarch simply do not share. This theory is supported by the unusual prevalence of Khatan shards in Maynarch military operations, where other dynasties deploy these dangerous entities only in the most desperate circumstances. Maynarch forces incorporate them as standard tactical assets. They have developed specialized containment systems that allow for more precise control of these shards, enabling deployment of multiple fragments simultaneously without the risk of rebellion that typically limits their use. The technique for achieving this control remains unknown, but appears to involve technologies derived from the original Khatan imprisonment methods used during the Necron Rebellion. The Orphean War eventually reached a stalemate not through Imperial military success, but because the Maynarch simply ceased their advance after achieving objectives known only to them. Analysis of their withdrawal patterns suggests they had secured specific stellar coordinates or artifacts rather than territory per se. The dynasty consolidated their gains, established a buffer zone of sterilized worlds, and entered a phase of reduced activity that continues to the present day. This operational pause has allowed Imperial forces to establish a quarantine zone around confirmed Maynarch holdings, though breaches occur with disturbing regularity. Rogue trader vessels occasionally report ghost ships drifting at the edge of Maynarch territory, Imperial craft found completely depopulated, but with life support systems still functioning and no signs of conventional combat. These vessels typically contain a single cryptic message left in a prominent location, variations on the phrase insufficient complexity for preservation, suggesting the Maynarch examined the crews and found them wanting by some incomprehensible standard. The golden light of the Necron Dynasties' phase technology illuminates the darkness of space like spectral apparitions, their warriors shifting between material states with an ease that unnerves even other Necrons. Unlike the expansionist Imotekh or the destructive Maynarch, the Necron pursue a different ambition, transcendence through the mastery of dimensional physics and phase technology. Necron tomb worlds are immediately recognizable by their distinctive architecture. Where other dynasties favor imposing monoliths of dark necrodermis, Necron structures incorporate translucent crystalline elements that channel and amplify phase energies. These buildings exist partially in real space and partially in dimensional interstices, giving them a shimmering, insubstantial appearance that belies their actual durability. Approaching a Necron tomb complex produces a disorienting effect as perception shifts between dimensional states, making it nearly impossible for organic minds to maintain a coherent understanding of the space. The dynasty's warriors bear the same golden hue as their structures, their necrodermis bodies modified to incorporate phase modulators at every joint. These devices allow Necrons to shift portions of their bodies out of phase with normal space-time, passing through solid matter, or avoiding incoming attacks by temporarily existing in a different dimensional state. Imperial forces engaging Nephrek troops report the disturbing sight of weapons fire passing harmlessly through their targets, or warriors stepping through supposedly impenetrable barriers as if they were merely holograms. At the head of this dynasty stands Pharaon Xisuthros, known as the Transient One. Unlike most Necron rulers who project an image of immovable permanence, Xisuthros appears deliberately ephemeral, his form constantly shifting between different degrees of materiality. Those who have witnessed him describe a tall, slender figure whose edges seem to blur into golden light, with only his eyes remaining consistently solid, 2 points of emerald fire, in a face that otherwise lacks definition. This appearance is not the result of damage or degradation, but a deliberate modification, symbolizing the Pharaon's commitment to transcending the limitations of physical existence. The Nephrek obsession with phase technology predates even the war in heaven. As Necrontyr, they inhabited a region of space characterized by unusual stellar phenomena, stars that seem to flicker in and out of existence, appearing and disappearing according to patterns that defied conventional astrophysics. Their scientists devoted millennia to understanding these anomalies, eventually developing theories about dimensional interfaces that would later form the foundation of their phase technology. When biotransference offered them immortal bodies, the Nephrek embraced it with a specific goal in mind. Where other dynasties sought power, territory, or revenge against the old ones, the Nephrek viewed necrodermis bodies as merely the first step toward true transcendence. They believed that by mastering the boundaries between dimensions, they could eventually evolve beyond physical form entirely, becoming beings of pure energy and consciousness. This philosophical outlook shapes every aspect of Nephrek military doctrine. Their forces emphasize mobility and unpredictability over raw firepower, using their phase technology to bypass enemy defenses rather than overcoming them directly. Nephrek warriors can phase through battlefield obstacles, emerging behind enemy lines to attack from unexpected angles. Their immortals carry modified Tesla carbines that fire phase-shifted energy bolts, capable of penetrating even the thickest armor by partially existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The most elite Nephrek units, known as Transcendent Lich Guard, represent the pinnacle of their phase mastery. These warriors can shift not just themselves, but also nearby allies between dimensional states, creating protective bubbles of altered reality around important objectives or commanders. Armed with hyperphase glaives that cut through both physical matter and the fabric of space-time itself, they serve as both bodyguards and dimensional anchors, stabilizing reality around them even as they manipulate it. The Nephrek approach to warfare was demonstrated with particular clarity during their conflict with the Ildari of Craftworld Eandon. When a Nephrek tomb world activated in a system that the Eldar had claimed during the dynasty's long sleep, initial diplomatic overtures were attempted by Eandon's Farseers, who recognized the potential catastrophe of full-scale war between their forces. These efforts failed not due to Necron hostility, but because of fundamental differences in perception. The Nephrek representatives kept phase shifting during negotiations, appearing in different locations around the conference chamber or temporarily disappearing altogether, behaviors the Eldar interpreted as deliberate insults rather than expressions of the dynasty's nature. The resulting conflict showcased the unique challenges of fighting the Nephrek. Eldar aspect warriors found their targeting systems confounded by enemies who existed in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Wraithguard, normally impervious to conventional weapons, discovered that Nephrek phase blades could sever the connections between their spirit stones and wraithbone bodies, effectively killing them despite their already non-living status. Most concerning to the Eldar was the Nephrek's apparent ability to phase partially into the warp without suffering the corruption that would affect most entities. Nephrek cryptechs had developed specialized field generators that created controlled dimensional apertures, allowing their forces to perceive and even briefly interact with the Imperium without fully entering it. This technology enabled them to track the movement of Eldar forces through the webway, predicting where they would emerge and preparing ambushes accordingly. The conflict reached its climax when a Nephrek force led by Pharaon Xisuthros himself penetrated Eandon's outer defenses by phase shifting an entire tomb ship through the craftworld's wraithbone hull. Rather than launching a conventional assault, however, the Necrons targeted a specific chamber deep within Eandon, a repository of ancient crystal matrices containing astronomical data from before the fall. After securing these crystals, the Nephrek withdrew as suddenly as they had arrived, leaving confused Eldar defenders to wonder at their true objective. Analysis by Eandon's Farseers later revealed that the stolen data contained information about the dimensional anomalies the Nephrek had studied in their original Necron-tier form, star systems with unusual phase, properties that the Eldar had subsequently mapped during their expansion. This suggested that the entire conflict had been orchestrated not for territorial gain, but as a targeted data acquisition mission, furthering the dynasty's obsessive pursuit of transcendence. The Nephrek relationship with other Necron dynasties remains complex. Their technological innovations, particularly in phase field generators and dimensional stabilizers, make them valuable allies, but their philosophical outlook often puts them at odds with more conventionally minded Necron rulers. Where dynasties like the Imotekh seek to rebuild their empire in material space, the Nephrek view such ambitions as fundamentally limited, focusing instead on research that most other Necrons consider esoteric or even dangerous. In stark contrast to the golden radiance of the Nephrek stands the crimson brutality of the Navok dynasty. Their blood-red warriors represent an anomaly among Necron forces, a dynasty that specializes in close-quarter combat, defying the conventional image of Necrons as ranged fighters who rely on Gauss weaponry and technological superiority rather than direct engagement. The Navok's unusual combat doctrine stems from their pre-biotransference culture. As Necron-tier, they inhabited a cluster of worlds characterized by dense jungle environments where long-range visibility was limited, forcing them to develop combat techniques suited to sudden, close-range encounters. Their warriors trained extensively with blade weapons designed to cut through the thick vegetation of their homeworlds, creating a martial tradition that emphasized speed and precision over power. When biotransference transformed them into Necrons, this cultural emphasis on close combat was encoded into their command protocols. Their necrodermis bodies were modified with enhanced joint articulation and reinforced grip mechanisms, allowing for more fluid movement and better weapon handling than standard Necron warriors. Their hyperphase swords and dispersion shields, while superficially similar to those used by other dynasties, incorporate subtle modifications that optimize them for aggressive combat rather than defensive operations. The Navok color scheme reflects this aggressive nature. Their warriors bear deep crimson energy pathways against burnished silver necrodermis, creating the impression of blood flowing through metal veins. This appearance, combined with their preference for blade weapons, has led Imperial forces to nickname them the Flayed One's Cousins, though the Navok themselves consider this comparison deeply offensive, maintaining strict protocols for the immediate destruction of any genuine Flayed Ones that emerge from their tomb worlds. Pharaon Zarathusa leads the dynasty with a directness unusual among Necron rulers. Where most Pharaons command from secure locations deep within tomb complexes, Zarathusa frequently takes the field personally, leading elite units of Lichguard in spearhead assaults against enemy positions. His necrodermis form towers over even other Necron nobles, standing nearly 3 meters tall and bearing a massive war scythe that Imperial records claim has decapitated Space Marine captains and Orc warbosses alike. The Navok approach to warfare emphasizes rapid deployment and overwhelming assault. Their forces typically begin engagements with conventional Necron tactics, teleport insertions, quantum shielding, and supporting fire from immortals and tomb blades. This conventional phase lasts only until the enemy's formation has been disrupted, at which point Navok commanders deploy their specialized close combat units via night scythes or monoliths, flooding the battlefield with warriors bearing hyperphase swords and dispersion shields. These close combat specialists operate in precisely coordinated phalanxes, their movements synchronized through command protocols to a degree impossible for organic combatants. Each warrior's position is calculated to support adjacent units, creating overlapping fields of defense while maximizing offensive coverage. Against opponents accustomed to facing Necrons at range, this sudden shift to close-quarters fighting often creates tactical confusion that the Navok exploit ruthlessly. The most elite of these assault units are the Crimson Court, a formation of Lich Guard who serve as both Zarathus's personal bodyguard and the dynasty's premier shock troops. These warriors bear more extensive modifications than standard Navok forces, with reinforced leg actuators that allow for sudden bursts of speed and specialized sensory arrays that track enemy movement patterns to predict and counter defensive reactions. Armed with hyperphase glaives that can shift between solid and energy states mid-swing, they can adapt their attacks to penetrate any defense they encounter. The effectiveness of Navok combat doctrine was demonstrated during their conflict with Hive Fleet Gorgon in the Perdus Rift. When Tyranid forces invaded a star system containing a dormant Navok tomb world, the awakening protocols activated in response to the massive biological signatures detected on the planet's surface. Initial Necron forces emerged to find their world overrun with Tyranid organisms, the local human population already consumed, an adaptive evolution in progress as the hive mind analyzed and countered conventional Necron weaponry. Rather than engaging in the protracted ranged combat that would have allowed the Tyranids to develop further adaptations, Pharaon Zarathusa ordered an immediate full-scale assault focusing on close-quarter engagements. Navok warriors teleported directly into the densest concentrations of Tyranid organisms, their hyperphase blades severing synaptic connections faster than the hive mind could process and adapt to the threat. The Necrons' necrodermis bodies proved resistant to the corrosive biological weapons that had evolved to counter their Gauss technology, while their phase weapons bypassed the rapidly thickening carapaces of Tyranid warrior organisms. The conflict reached its climax when Navok forces identified and targeted the Norn Queen directing the invasion, teleporting a full phalanx of the Crimson Court directly into its chamber deep beneath the planet's surface. The resulting battle lasted less than 20 minutes, but saw the complete destruction of the Tyranid command organism and the subsequent collapse of synaptic control across the Hive fleet. Without central coordination, the remaining Tyranid forces devolved into feral behavior patterns that made them vulnerable to systematic elimination by conventional Necron weapons. Beyond the established dynasties, the awakening Necron Empire has also seen the emergence of independent overlords and lords who operate outside traditional power structures. Some command fragments of shattered dynasties, while others have deliberately severed their command protocols to pursue individual agendas. These independent operators represent wild cards in the galaxy's power dynamics, their motivations and methods often incomprehensible even to other Necrons. Among these independent figures, none has had more far-reaching impact than Anraker the Traveler. Once a high-ranking overlord of the Pyrrhian dynasty, Anraker emerged from the Great Sleep to find his tomb world destroyed and his dynasty scattered beyond recovery. Rather than attempting to rebuild his lost power base, he embarked on a unique mission, awakening dormant tomb worlds across the galaxy, regardless of their dynastic affiliations. Anraker's motivations remain subject to debate among those xenoarchaeologists brave or foolish enough to study Necron politics. Some theorize that he seeks to rebuild a unified Necron empire, while others suggest his goal is to ensure that all Necrons awaken in time to face some coming threat that only he has foreseen. What remains clear is that his actions have accelerated the pace of Necron reemergence across multiple sectors, creating complications for Imperial defense planning and resource allocation. The Traveler's physical form reflects his independent status. Where dynastic Necrons bear colors and markings identifying their affiliations, Anraker's necrodermis body displays a patchwork of different styles and technologies, components salvaged and incorporated from the various tomb worlds he has visited. His primary weapon, the Tachyon arrow, represents technology beyond even typical Necron capabilities, a handheld device capable of firing a projectile at near light speed with enough force to penetrate the armor of a battle tank. Anraker travels with a core force of loyal Pyrrhian warriors who escaped their dynasty's destruction, supplemented by troops recruited from each tomb world he awakens. His flagship, the Pyrrhian Eternal, serves as both transport and mobile command center, its system specifically modified to detect the unique energy signatures of dormant tomb complexes. Upon locating such a facility, Anraker's standard approach involves establishing a perimeter defense before personally entering the stasis chambers to initiate revival protocols for the entombed nobility. These awakening operations don't always proceed smoothly. Many tomb worlds have suffered damage during the Great Sleep, resulting in corrupted command protocols or degraded neural pathways among their inhabitants. In such cases, Anraker employs specialized cryptechs who accompany his expedition, experts in repairing and recalibrating the technologies that maintain Necron consciousness. When even these measures prove insufficient, he has been known to incorporate damaged nobles into his own command structure, offering them purpose when their original dynasties can no longer be salvaged. The most controversial aspect of Anraker's activities is his approach to tomb worlds controlled by active dynasties. Rather than respecting established territorial claims, he has on multiple occasions infiltrated such worlds to awaken additional forces without the ruling pharaoh's permission. These actions have created tensions with major powers like the Imotekh dynasty, whose overlords view his unauthorized activations as tantamount to theft of military assets. A particularly notable incident occurred when Anraker arrived at a Imotekh-controlled system to find it under attack by an Orc-Wa rather than coordinating with the Imotekh defenders. He bypassed the ongoing battle entirely, penetrating to a secondary tomb complex that the Imotekh had deliberately left dormant as a strategic reserve. After activating its inhabitants, he led them not to reinforce the Imotekh position, but to attack a different Orc concentration on the far side of the planet. This unexpected second front confused the Orc leadership and ultimately contributed to the Wa's defeat, but the Imotekh overlord nevertheless filed a formal grievance with the Pyrrhian Eternal's command protocols, demanding reparations for the unauthorized activation. Anraker's response to such complaints typically involves a complex form of Necron diplomacy that combines logical arguments about the greater good of their species with thinly veiled threats regarding his knowledge of backdoor access codes to supposedly secure tomb defenses. His status as an independent operator with no fixed territory makes conventional retaliation difficult, while his demonstrated willingness to assist against external threats ensures that most dynasties tolerate his interference, however reluctantly. The counterpoint to Anraker's unifying efforts can be seen in fractured dynasties like the Necthist, where succession disputes have created multiple competing courts claiming the same dynastic legacy. The Necthist territories encompass approximately 30 star systems in what Imperial cartographers designate as the Ghoul Stars, a region already known for anomalous phenomena and dangerous Xenos activity. Within this domain, at least 3 distinct factions claim to be the legitimate heirs of the original Necthist dynasty, each controlled by an overlord who styles themselves as the true pharaoh. The roots of this fragmentation trace back to the final days before the Great Sleep, when Pharaoh Nectar the Executioner was destroyed during the rebellion against the Khatan. With no clear succession protocol activated before the dynasty entered stasis, multiple noble-rank Necrons with legitimate claims to leadership emerged from hibernation nearly simultaneously. Rather than resolving the dispute through negotiation, each claimant activated the warriors and constructs under their direct control and declared themselves the rightful ruler. The return of Zarak, the Silent King, from his self-imposed exile in the intergalactic void, marked a profound shift in Necron affairs across the galaxy. After 60 million years wandering the darkness between galaxies, the last leader of the Triarch returned with dire purpose. His necrodermis form showed signs of extensive modification, with components unlike any seen in other Necron constructs. Most notable were the sensory arrays integrated into his shoulder pauldrons, designed to detect and analyze biological patterns on a galactic scale. The Silent King's return coincided with the arrival of Hive Fleet Leviathan in the galaxy's southern reaches. This timing was no coincidence. During his exile, Zarek had encountered the advancing tendrils of the Tyranid Hive fleets in the void between galaxies. What he witnessed there fundamentally altered his plans for the Necron race. The Tyranids represented a threat unlike any other, a species that consumed not just lives but entire biospheres, leaving nothing but barren rock in their wake. For most races, this consumption would merely represent the end of their civilization. For the Necrons, it threatened something far worse: the permanent elimination of any organic bodies that might one day host their consciousness again. The Silent King's greatest revelation during his exile was that immortality in soulless metal bodies was not victory, but an evolutionary dead end. True continuity for the Necron race would require a return to organic form, a reversal of biotransference that would restore not just their flesh, but their souls and ability to evolve. The Tyranid advance threatened to devour the very biological materials the Necrons would need for this transformation. Every world consumed by the Hive fleets represented countless genetic templates lost forever, narrowing the options for potential bodies that might one day host Necron consciousness. This realization transformed Zarek's perspective from that of a conqueror to a conservationist. The galaxy and its myriad life forms were no longer merely territory to reclaim, but a biological repository that must be preserved for the Necrons' ultimate salvation. Upon his return, the Silent King began a systematic campaign to unite the fractured Necron Dynasties. His approach differed markedly from his pre-exile rule. Where once he commanded through encoded authority and unbreakable command protocols, he now relied on diplomacy, persuasion, and the presentation of existential logic. The Tyranid threat provided a powerful unifying factor, but even this required careful framing to convince dynastic leaders whose priorities had diverged dramatically during the Great Sleep. For expansionist dynasties like the Imotekh, Zarek emphasized how Tyranid consumption would leave them with empty territories devoid of resources or subjects. To the Nihilak collectors, he pointed out that biological diversity represented the ultimate collection, irreplaceable once lost. For the destructive Maynarch, he framed the conflict as a contest against the only species that might rival their capacity for annihilation. Each approach was carefully calibrated to the dynasty's core values, gradually building a coalition against the common threat. Not all Necron leaders accepted Zarek's leadership or his vision for their future. The most significant philosophical divide emerged around the question of what the Necron race should ultimately become. Three major competing visions took shape, each with powerful adherents among the awakened dynasties. The Flesh Reclamation faction, led by Zarek himself and supported by technological innovators like Illuminar Shi'Ras, advocated for a return to organic bodies. This group invested vast resources in genetic research, capturing and studying specimens from thousands of species to identify suitable templates for future Necron consciousness. Their laboratories contained everything from basic single-celled organisms to complex sentience, with particular focus on species demonstrating resilience, adaptability, and neural complexity. Shi'Ras, whose obsession with biotransference had extended from before the Great Sleep into the current era, approached the problem with clinical detachment. His experiments involved the systematic transfer of neural patterns between different biological substrates, testing compatibility and retention rates. These procedures, conducted on unwilling subjects from various species, were characterized by a cold efficiency that ignored the suffering involved. For Shi'Ras, the screams of test subjects were merely data points in a grand experiment that might eventually restore the Necron race to organic existence. The Mechanical Transcendence faction, championed by Trazyn the Infinite and elements of the Necrek dynasty, rejected the return to flesh as regressive. They argued that the Necrons should embrace their mechanical nature but transcend its current limitations. Their research focused on artificial consciousness, quantum computing, and dimensional engineering, technologies that might allow Necron minds to exist as pure information, free from dependence on either organic bodies or necrodermis shells. Trazyn's contribution to this approach was particularly significant. His experience preserving intact moments of history in tesseract labyrinths had given him unique insights into the storage and maintenance of complex states, including consciousness itself. His facilities on Solemnus included experimental chambers where Necron neural patterns were temporarily extracted from their necrodermis bodies and maintained as pure energy fields, experiencing existence without physical form. Most subjects reported this state as simultaneously liberating and disorienting, suggesting that true transcendence would require fundamental changes to Necron psychology as well as technology. The third major faction, the Supremacy Directive, maintained that the Necrons should focus on perfecting their current form rather than seeking radical transformation. Led by Imotekh the Stormlord and supported by traditionalist elements across multiple dynasties, this group viewed both organic reclamation and mechanical transcendence as distractions from the immediate goal of re-establishing Necron dominance across the galaxy. They invested in incremental improvements to existing necrodermis technology, enhancing its self-repair capabilities, energy efficiency, and neural interface systems. The supremacy approach emphasized practical applications over theoretical breakthroughs. Their research produced innovations like enhanced phase shifters that allowed Necron warriors to move through solid matter with greater precision, improved quantum shielding that could adapt to enemy weapon frequencies in real time, and more sophisticated command protocols that balanced centralized control with tactical flexibility. While less ambitious than the competing visions, this pragmatic focus delivered immediate military advantages that strengthened the faction's position in inter-dynasty politics. Beyond these philosophical divisions, the practical challenge of uniting the Necron Dynasties against the Tyrannid threat required addressing their severely depleted numbers. Millions of years of dormancy had taken a heavy toll, with countless tomb worlds failing to reactivate or emerging with only a fraction of their inhabitants intact. The Silent King's solution involved the reactivation of ancient manufacturing facilities capable of producing new necrodermis bodies. Unlike the biotransference chambers that had created the original Necrons, these facilities could only produce empty vessels, mechanical bodies without consciousness. To address this limitation, Zarek authorized a controversial procedure, the subdivision of existing Necron consciousness. Using technologies similar to those employed by the Charnavok dynasty in their composite warriors, individual Necron minds could be carefully partitioned and installed in multiple bodies, creating several distinct but related entities from a single source. This process carried significant risks, including personality fragmentation and accelerated neural degradation. The nobles who volunteered for the procedure often emerged with their original memories but altered personality traits, as certain aspects became emphasized in each copy while others diminished. The resulting branch personalities maintained a connection to their source but gradually developed into independent individuals as their experiences diverged. This multiplication of consciousness helped address the population shortage but created new complications in dynastic hierarchies, with multiple copies of the same noble sometimes claiming the same titles and territories. The search for technological solutions extended beyond population concerns to include ancient superweapons that might turn the tide against existential threats. While the most famous of these, the celestial orrery maintained by the Oriskar dynasty, remained under tight control rather than being actively sought, other devices of similar potential became the focus of intense competition among Necron factions. The Ionic Orb, a containment device housing a fragment of a star's core, represented one of the most powerful weapons in the Necron arsenal. Originally designed during the War in Heaven, these massive spherical constructs channeled stellar energy into devastating attacks capable of vaporizing entire armies or burning away a planet's atmosphere. Most had been destroyed or lost during the rebellion against the Khatan, but rumors of intact specimens in forgotten tomb complexes drove multiple expeditions into unexplored regions of the galaxy. The Imotekh dynasty committed significant resources to locating a legendary weapon known as the Hand of Darkness, reputed to be capable of extinguishing stars with a gesture. Historical records suggested it had been sealed away in a tesseract labyrinth by the Silent King himself after it demonstrated unpredictable effects during the Khatan Rebellion. The vault containing this artifact was believed to exist in a pocket dimension accessible only through a specific sequence of webway gates, making its recovery a complex challenge involving both technological expertise and military force to secure the necessary access points. Perhaps the most ambitious search involved the world engine technology that had once allowed entire planets to be converted into mobile fortress worlds. The technical specifications for these massive conversion processes were thought lost during the Great Sleep, but fragmentary data recovered from damaged tomb worlds suggested that complete templates might still exist in certain royal crypts. The Charnavok dynasty, with their expertise in adaptation and recovery, led efforts to piece together this information from scattered sources, occasionally forming temporary alliances with other dynasties to access particularly valuable data repositories. These technological pursuits often brought Necron forces into conflict, not just with the Tyranids, but with other major powers in the galaxy. The Imperium of Man, particularly the Adeptus Mechanicus, viewed Necron technology as both heretical and irresistibly valuable, leading to frequent clashes over archaeological sites and ancient artifacts. The Eldari, with their long memory of the war in heaven, intervened whenever possible to prevent Necrons from recovering their most devastating weapons, viewing this as necessary for the galaxy's survival regardless of the Tyranid threat. Despite these tensions, the unprecedented nature of challenges in the 42nd millennium has created unusual opportunities for cooperation between the Necrons and races they would traditionally consider enemies. The Silent King himself established limited communication channels with certain Imperial factions, particularly after the formation of the Great Rift created new strategic imperatives for all involved. These contacts rarely reached the level of formal alliance, but occasionally produced coordinated actions against mutual threats. The most notable example occurred during a major Tyranid assault on the Orpheus sector, where Necron forces under Anraker, the Travelers synchronized their counterattacks with Space Marine chapters operating in the region. No direct communication took place, but each side adjusted their deployments to complement the other's movements, creating a more effective defense than either could have managed alone. Similar tacit coordination has been observed against chaos incursions in regions where both Necron tomb worlds and Imperial planets face common threats from warp entities. More formal arrangements have occasionally emerged with the Tiao Empire, whose pragmatic approach to diplomacy allows for negotiation even with Xenos as alien as the Necrons. Several non-aggression pacts have been documented, typically involving clearly defined boundaries and mutual recognition of territorial claims. These agreements rarely last long, undermined by the fundamental incompatibility of Tiao expansionism and Necron territorial reclamation, but they demonstrate a flexibility in Necron diplomacy that would have been unthinkable before the Silent King's return. As the Necron race moves deeper into the 42nd millennium, their long-term goals remain complex and sometimes contradictory. The immediate imperative of halting the Tyranid advance has created temporary unity, but the fundamental questions of what the Necrons should become remain unresolved. The path of flesh reclamation offers a return to their biological roots, but would mean abandoning the immortality they sacrificed so much to achieve. Mechanical transcendence promises evolution beyond current limitations, but risks losing what remains of their identity in the process. The supremacy approach provides continuity, but accepts the limitations that have defined their existence since biotransference. For individual Necrons, these grand strategic questions intersect with more personal concerns. Neural degradation continues to affect even the highest-ranking nobles, with personality erosion and memory loss creating existential crises that their mechanical bodies cannot resolve through natural healing. Some seek technological solutions, transferring their consciousness to new bodies with more sophisticated neural architecture. Others embrace specialized forms of stasis, entering dormancy for millennia at a time to preserve what remains of their selfhood for critical moments. The most desperate turn to Khatan shards, seeking forbidden knowledge that might stabilize their fragmenting minds despite the extreme risks such contact entails. The future of the Necron race thus remains uncertain, balanced between extinction and transformation. Their ancient empire may never return to its former glory, but something new might emerge from its remains, whether that takes the form of organic rebirth, mechanical transcendence, or some as yet unimagined synthesis remains to be seen. What seems certain is that the Necrons, who have already existed for 60 million years, are playing a game measured in millennia rather than centuries. Their plans unfold with glacial patience, each move calculated to advance multiple objectives across timescales that other races can barely comprehend. In this longest of games, even the God Emperor of mankind represents merely the latest in a long succession of temporary powers. The Necrons have watched civilizations rise and fall countless times before. They will endure, adapt, and ultimately pursue their vision of ascendance, whatever form that ultimately takes, with the inexorable persistence that only the truly deathless can maintain.